Good evening and welcome to the City Council Study Session meeting of Tuesday, May 21st, 2024. There are 3 items on the agenda. First of these is discussion regarding the proposed FYE 2025 City of Norman budget enterprise funds. Take it
Thank
away.
you, Mayor and Council. I'm Kim Kaufman, Budget Manager, and I have a whole team here with me. We have our Utility Department Director, Chris Mattingly, and then Nathan Madenwald, our Head Engineer. And we're going to go through this presentation on the Enterprise Funds budget for fiscal year 25. This is the 7th public budget hearing on the FYE 25 budget process. We have 2 more sessions after this, another public budget hearing, and then council will consider the budget for adoption on June 4th. So we always like to encourage and welcome feedback from our council, from our residents, from staff, of course. This is an interactive process, and we want to make sure all stakeholders are heard. So the enterprise funds operate differently than the general fund. You all had a session on the general fund last month, and then the capital funds. The enterprise funds are operated like a business enterprise. The intent is to recover the costs of providing the services or goods through user fees. So these funds should be self-sustaining if we're doing it right? These funds are the Sanitation Fund, the Water Fund, the Water Reclamation Fund, and then 2 sub-funds of the Water Reclamation Fund are the Sewer Maintenance Fund and the New Development Excise Tax Fund, which I guess Chris or Nathan have started calling the WET Fund. I guess Wastewater Excise Tax Fund, perhaps?
Yeah, we use those interchangeably. Sorry about that.
That's fun. Fun. Fun with acronyms. So we'll start with the Sanitation Fund. And we offer residential and commercial collection. We bring in more than 110,000 tons per year. Our yard waste and compost facility brings in more than 30,000 tons per year. We started curbside recycling in 2008, and right now we use Republic Services for this. We have more than an 85% participation rate, and we collect more than 4,000 tons a year. And these graphics depict our annual tons in the landfill and the compost facility. And you can see the landfill tonnage has been pretty consistent over the last 10 years or so. A slight uptick in 21, perhaps due to COVID, perhaps due to population growth. And then the compost facility, we had that big spike in fiscal year 21 due to that ice storm, right, in October of 2020. So we're projecting a slight uptick there, but it's still been pretty consistent. So we have 4 drop-off centers with recycling depicted here in the map. We bring in more than 1,700 tons per year. We have a hub at the transfer station where we collect scrap, iron, wood, and glass. And we receive more than 175 tons in glass recycling every year. So my favorite part of the Enterprise Fund presentation is this rate comparison. Lots of different colors here. The green lines depict cities that offer curbside recycling. The blue lines depict cities that do not offer curbside recycling. And the orange lines offer curbside recycling only through a third-party contractor like Recyclops. Norman's $17.20 monthly fee includes spring and fall cleanup days, 1 time a week collection, 1 time a week yard waste collection, free brush drop off, 4 recycling drop off centers, free compost as available, and then of course the residential curbside recycling. And you can see here that there are 3 cities that are cheaper than Norman, but only one of them offers curbside recycling, and that's Edmond. Edmond is just barely cheaper than Norman's $17.20 rate. At $16.93 each month. Enid does not offer curbside recycling, and their monthly rate is, I didn't write it down, $14 a month. Who else? Newcastle is $13.75 per month without curbside recycling. So we're pretty competitive here. As you can see, we offer a lot of freebies with our $17 monthly rate. And it's a great program. So major revenue assumptions with the sanitation fund. The rate increased, our last increase was in April of 2011 to our current $17.20 rate. That includes the $3 per month recycling charge and 20 cents a month for the Oklahoma Solid Waste Management charge. And then you can add an additional polycart for $7 a month. To date, revenues have been estimated at a growth rate of 1.8% each year. But we're looking at adjusting that to 1.5% growth rate each year to kind of match up with AIM's projected population growth rate for Norman.
Yes, ma'am.
So I know we talk about rates and stuff. What is the cost what does it cost to provide the service? So revenues are estimated to gain 1.8, 1.5, whatever. But what's the cost to provide the service?
We're a nonprofit, and so as you watch the balance, sanitation is our best fund as far as staying in the positive, going out in the years. So we think we're about right. We're a little nervous because there has been, we had an HHW a couple of years ago. That's a new expense. And now taking over recycling, we're gonna try to do it equal or cheaper than what Republic was doing it for. We're gonna have some growing pains there, and we have to figure it out. So we have some things moving. So I think right now the rate seems to be about right. Also, we have Reftelis getting right. They're redoing our rate study right now, and they're gonna do a deep dive into cost of what we're doing and how we look and when do we need the next rate increase.
Perfect. Thank you.
And to add to that, just real quick, there's a couple things like the landfill disposal expense. We've got that RFP out to bid, and we're looking at getting the recycling out to bid. So we really want to have those new numbers before Reptilis really push forward with that stuff. So
They're jumping way
I
ahead.
know we're getting on our next
Oh,
slide.
sorry.
Get excited.
Yeah.
Major expenditures for fiscal year 25, just over $3 million was included in the fiscal year 25 budget for fleet and receptacle replacements. So those big trash trucks, pretty expensive. Landfill tipping expenses increased 9% from the current fiscal year to fiscal year 25, and our annual expense for tipping is just over $3 million. We did not
Oh, please finish up.
we did not increase our recycling contractor expense, kind of getting ready for the transition to in-house.
Okay. I just wanted to note that cost of landfill tipping, costing the city of Norman $3.1 million a year just to throw our trash away. So something that all of our residents need to be aware of. It's not, they may see $17 a month on that bill, but I think if more people knew that the total to just throw stuff away to the landfill would cost taxpayers or ratepayers $3.1 million per year. And all of the things we could do if we didn't have to spend that much money to just throw stuff away. We're just throwing it in the landfill.
And that charge is based on tonnage, so if we can reduce that tonnage, we can shave money off that 3.1. That'd be the goal.
It's expensive to throw stuff away. So point of that.
And recycling helps with that, of course. And so we're projecting a fiscal year 25 ending fund balance in the sanitation fund of just over $2 million. Major projects completed in the current fiscal year. Of course, our new sanitation facility at a cost of just over $3 million. Major projects from the current fiscal year to be completed next fiscal year include the compost facility scale house at $420,000, the transfer station renovation at $1.9 million, and then new sanitation projects for fiscal year 25. We have one, the sanitation storage building at $650,000. Potential budget impacts for next budget process. We currently have an RFP out for the landfill disposal that Nathan was discussing. We're going to have an RFP for the recycling commodities in May of 24, so this month. transition of recycling to city staff, use of sanitation funds for litter crews, and then an upcoming cost of service study for sanitation.
How many other options are there in landfills to be able to go to?
There's about 5 in our area. It's hauling gasoline costs to get it there and back. So we have about 5 that are gonna propose on it, we think. We send it to them.
Yeah, I kind of to piggyback on that, when you had the slide of all the different cities, I wondered what were the apples to apples, what were the apples to oranges? Because like I looked up Stillwater, they're hovering around 50,000 people. Edmond was at like 98,000 people. We're about 130. So I was like trying to figure out like, is it because Edmond or Stillwater has to drive further to dump? But then Edmonds, I guess it's kind of close to that one that's up off of, is it 240 or I-40? It's one of those big dumps. So yeah, just trying to figure out like why ours is where it's at and why some of these other comparable cities.
A lot of things. I mean, we could talk a long time on that, actually. One thing is East Norman is not very dense, so that's actually a negative to us. I mean, because we're driving a truck around, but we're not picking up much garbage. So, but then we are lucky that these 5 that are gonna bid our disposal costs are we're close to a lot of landfills. I mean, we have 5 within reach. That's really lucky compared to other cities that, like you're saying, might have to drive further to get to those. And there's other things. I know Edmund was just discussing with me at a SWANA event that they have some caveats on how they're handling their landfill that they could see some savings if they did some things different. So everyone's looking at ways to save money, but some of it's just fortunate of where our location is compared to the landfills.
Okay, so we're probably more like an Edmond than we are a Stillwater.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
One thing I might point out is that some of the smaller cities here do not operate as enterprises. They're part of the city's general fund.
Wow.
So like more maybe?
I suspect Newcastle for sure,
Okay.
and probably Enid.
And another thing they tell us as we went around to all the different landfills, they love Oklahoma City because that's a big base they can count on. They know how to plan for it. So they're the #1 preferred customer. And Norman is #2 preferred customer because we're $3 million a year that they can count on. We're clean, we have a good quality trash, residential. They know, so they want us. They want us as their base potato in their landfills.
Which isn't good.
So that's
I
good.
want to be the preferred customer.
And some of these smaller cities do use the Oklahoma City landfill. They don't have their own landfill, but why do we use these 16 cities to compare to? There's a lot of different demographics that might have a similarity with Norman. Some of them are in the same area. Some of them have a college. So we just like to have like a big picture when we're looking at our rates and using those things to compare to. But yeah, it just makes for an interesting comparison. Where are we? Ready for the water fund? So we produce over 5 billion gallons of water annually. And this is a graph of our annual water production. So you can see that we've had growth each year since 2019. And of course, water production runs 24 hours a day, 365 days per year. And this is a picture of our water treatment plant right here. Water line maintenance division in the water fund. They maintain over 650 miles of water pipe with diameters of 2 to 48 inches, over 7,000 fire hydrants, and over 14,000 valves. They repair an average of 185 water line breaks annually, and they replace 3,000 feet of old, deteriorated or undersized water mains annually, but staff has been focused on leading service line inventory. They've repaired, maintained almost 1,100 fire hydrants annually, and they maintain over 42,000 water meters each year. So this is kind of a summary of our water rate history over the last about 25 years. We adopted an inverted block rate in 1999 to encourage conservation. The progressive rate structure charges higher rates to the highest water users, and the highest tiers affect 25% of our residential customers. We had a water rate increase approved in March of 2006. One failed in August of 2010, but one was approved in January of 2015, and that was to fund the water treatment plant improvements and obtain 2 million gallons per day of additional groundwater supply. Of course, we had the water rate failure in April 22, and then the water rate increase was approved in June of 23 to fund groundwater disinfection, water line replacements, leads, is that lead or
Lead.
Lead, sorry, lead services and operational cost increases. So this is our new rate structure as of September of last year, a $10.90 base fee. 0 to 5,000 gallons of usage is $3.46 per 1,000 gallons, and then 5,000 to 15,000 is $4.50 per 1,000. 15 to 20 is $6.75 per 1,000, and then over 20,000 is $9.51. And you can see that progressive structure there, trying to encourage conservation. And then we have the summer surcharge during July and August. 35 cents per 1,000 gallons for usage over 20,000 gallons per month. And then we've had an ongoing mandatory odd even day watering rotation system to also try to help conservation. And then back to the rate comparison. So this is residential water, 10,000 gallons usage. Norman is the third lowest. Tulsa is lower, Ardmore is lower. I do have to say, I reached out to Ardmore a couple of times. They're the one city that does not publish their rates on their website, and they did not give me their updated water rates. So this is last year's data for Ardmore. It could be higher. But let me get to my notes here so I can speak intelligently. So the average here for 10,000 gallons was $66.89 out of these 17 cities. Edmond was the highest at $92 for 10,000 gallons. Ardmore was the lowest at $46.97. And then, of course, Norman sits at $52.70 for 10,000 gallons of usage.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm just curious why Tulsa might be lower. They have to vote on their water rates too, right? Or no, they don't. They don't. So they've been keeping up with inflation.
Right.
How did they manage to come in a little lower?
It's usually just based on who has the newest plants or the newest upgrades. Bartlesville used to be the highest in the state, and now theirs are I noticed are getting lower because they haven't upgraded in a while. Stillwater just did a bunch of upgrades, so they went up. Enid used to be the cheapest. They just built a new line to Call Lake. They're getting high. It's based on your projects, and so we just improved ours. So we're going to be high for a minute, or higher than we are, but then it'll get lower until our next big capital project.
And I will say, you'll see in a future slide that Tulsa actually has the highest sewer rates. So it could be part of that balance there.
Okay, thank you.
So major revenue assumptions for the water fund, we did adjust the user fee growth rate for fiscal years 26 and forward of 1.5%. And we're going to depict that in the final budget book. We can adjust the out years without having to request an amendment from council. Water connection charges were increased for all meter sizes in 2022 and 2023 as follows. And you can see the slight increase for the 3/4 of an inch meter size up to 2 inches in 22 and 23 there. Expenditure assumptions in the water fund. Interim water purchase contract with Oklahoma City is $1.2 million. It's 1 million gallons a day, take or pay at $2.78 per 1,000 through 2024. And then in January of 25, it does increase to $2.91 per 1,000 gallons. this, I always have to look up these acronyms that you guys always, the COMCD Central Oklahoma Master Conservancy District. We have 938,000 budgeted for fiscal year 25. This is no change from 24. And this, of course, is the replacement of a raw water line in Lake Thunderbird that supplies water for Norman, Midwest City, and Dell City. And Norman's share is 43% of that. And then almost 400,000 was included in the fiscal year 25 budget for fleet-related replacement purchases and other capital equipment, including a backhoe at 175,000 and a skid steer at 111,000. The fiscal year 25 ending fund balance in the water fund is projected to be just over $1 million. Major water projects completed in the current fiscal year. Another ribbon cutting, our line maintenance building at a cost of $8.4 million, and this was joint funded with the Water Reclamation Fund. Beautiful. Major projects from the current fiscal year to be completed next fiscal year include South Lake Addition water line replacement at $2.7 million, Parsons water line replacement at $3.4 million, the AIM water master plan update at $500,000, the water line replacement Danfield by way of Brookhaven, $810,000. That's by way of? Okay. The lead surface line inventory submittal, October of 2024, more work to be done on this one. Major projects from the current fiscal year to be ongoing in fiscal year 25. The advanced water metering project, $16 million. James Garner water line replacement, Maine to Duffy, and this was a collaborative project with Public Works at $2.7 million. Jenkins water line replacement from Imhoff to Lindsay, also with Public Works, $2.6 million. Tecumseh water line from 24th Avenue Northwest to Journey Parkway, $5 million. Robinson water line from 12th Avenue Northeast to 24th Avenue Northeast, $3.7 million. And continued lead service line inventory and replacement.
What is the timeline on the advanced water metering?
So
Where are we in the process?
we awarded in April our contract to them. We're doing our kickoff meeting with our vendor in June. We're looking at having our initial deployment area happen later this year. And what we'll do is we'll find like suitable locations where we can test out our network geographically and with like the right customers so they can provide us feedback on how it's working for them, and also test to make sure it's integrating right with our system. People are getting bills correctly and not misbilling. All the bugs are worked out, and then we'll do full deployment pretty much all of next year. And then after that, we should be done hopefully in early 2026.
Wow. So any new meters that are going in right now, are they the new meters or are they old meters?
They are the new meters.
Okay,
We
So-
just have to wire them up.
got it. Perfect. One more question, sorry. And then the lead service line inventory, where are we in that timeline? Because I know you've been working really diligently and hard to kind of look at all of those potential areas that might have those lines.
Yeah. So line maintenance is, they're doing inventory for us. So what we did is we looked at different neighborhoods. We looked at, started with older age, did a random location within those neighborhoods just to get a snapshot of what we think was installed when those homes were built. We're going to use that data, and VODA is who we are going to use for our water line assessment analysis, but they also have, they're going to use AI to look at our lead lines and look at where we've got samples based on where are we seeing hits and where aren't we seeing hits, and where we should take more samples to get a better understanding of what's in our system. I'm not sure if DEQ is going to take those probabilities that they calculate, but it'll let us know better. But we'll get our inventory that we know and unknowns. We'll get that forward facing before the October deadline and get that submitted to DEQ.
That's what I was gonna ask. So we have an October deadline to get that,
Yes. And
the
that
first
does-
round of that, I guess, to.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean that you have to know what every line in the system is. It's just you have to have that forward facing, and if it's unknown,
Yeah.
we do have some little more hoops to go through to let people know we don't know what your service line is made of. So it's something to be cautious of.
We potholed over 600 And we found 21 so far, 21 lead lines.
Okay, that's actually a pretty good ratio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also in line with that, could you refresh my memory about Parsons? Was that also like you discovered a lead line over there, and that's what that project is? Yes.
Yeah. It's not, we're not doing that one because of the lead lines. Those were just lines that we had programmed for replacement. We just didn't have the funding to do that, and with the rate increase, we were able to move that one up.
But it is going to be inventoried in that lead.
We actually
situation.
did all the inventories because when we turn someone's service off, we have to make sure we provide them the right apparatus, you know, a pitcher filter to protect them. So that way when we turn theirs off and we turn it back on, all the stuff that was in that line, yeah, even where it connects, we want to make sure that they've got good filtered water for that 6
We
month
provide a
period.
pitcher. If we disrupt the service,
Yep.
we need to provide a pitcher.
Yeah. And we were gonna work with CDBG to maybe get them to do replacements on those, but I don't know that those homes are, if they're not, Lisa could talk to this better. But if no one's living there, if they're like rentals, then we can't do those, or if the income level's too high, then we won't be able to use those funds, so.
Water project construction. I have to say, if you've sat through this presentation for the last few years, there used to always be a picture of a dashboard with a glove on it. And everybody used to always be like, ew, what's that? And it's not there anymore. And I noticed that today as I was going through this, but anyway. So they took that out, so that's a bummer.
We'll put that one back in.
Water projects, major new water projects for fiscal year 25 and beyond. Groundwater treatment facility, $7 million just for construction. Robinson Water Tower, $773,000. Lindsay Water Tower, $350,000. Water treatment plant various improvements, $2.4 million. Water line replacement project design, $880,000. And that includes flood from Franklin North, Carter from Robinson South to Maine, Westwood Estates, and Royal Oaks. So moving on to the Water Reclamation Fund. They offer public tours of the water reclamation facility and the water treatment plant. Pretty interesting, and this is a picture of one of those tours here. This graph depicts average flow at the water reclamation facility for the last, I guess, 3 years or so. And you can see the 12-month rolling average black line there through the top. The dotted line depicts the design capacity, so we're still well below capacity. And then the lines at the top, and I had to look this up because but CBOD means carbonaceous biochemical oxygen demand, and that's one of those, that's I guess the darkest line at the top there. And then yellow is solids removal, and red is ammonia removal.
Yes, sir.
So Chris, a lot of capacity at the water reclamation facility that's new. We just did that less than 10 years ago. I think that was the largest infrastructural project the city's ever done, was that expansion. So because of having that much capacity, I mean, that's not half, but I mean, it's a lot. Why would a second plant be needed, and when, do you think?
Okay, good question. Right now, all the north flows are going to lift station D. And that is designed for about a 5 MGD, 3 to 5 MGD. I mean, peak is 5, I think 3 or 4, we're gonna be saying, about time to get a plant up there. Right now, those are flowing at about a 1.7 to 2 MGD. So we're watching that growth in the north part of Norman. When that triggers and gets up to a 3 or 4 MGD, maxing out its capacity to be able to pump it back over here to the south, that's our trigger to build the new north plant. Looking at it, it's looking like 2037, 2038 before that'll happen, before we would be coming to you before the north plant.
So what would that capacity that we have left over at our existing plant, would that just be
That'll take 4.5.
be able to absorb redevelopment that happens in existing part of the city, or?
It would take 4.5 million gallons a day off of this plant, because the full capacity for, back when we did the master plan, was a 21.5, 17 south, 4.5 on the north, and so that'll just free up That 4.5 will then be treated up there and handled at the north. So this one will go down and have more capacity at the south.
This one would have a lot of more capacity. What would that capacity be needed for then, though?
Growth.
In the existing part of Norman that's already developed out completely?
Out east, I mean, you know, you don't realize, but the Destin Landing areas that are already
That
kind
would
of
go
flat,
to the-
that's gonna be going here.
Just thinking about if we have all this excess capacity, our existing plant, how much sense will it make to try to sell people on, well, we need a second one, even though we've got 40% capacity left over at our current one, but I think that's a good explanation about the lift station and
Right,
how the geography is.
right,
Okay. I foresee that being something that,
right. That's
Yeah.
what we did. We built lift station D. It's a headworks to a plant. So it's got bar screens, it's got storm holding ponds. It looks just like a wastewater plant. It just doesn't have the treatment train. So that's the next piece. You just pump up. We were designing for that 12th and Franklin piece of land to put our treatment train on. But as we're going through this AIM process, we're asking our subcommittee, this group doing this tour, we're gonna ask them, do we need to move that out east? Where you wanna grow? And maybe we move this and capture more of where the planned growth will happen.
and is lift station D not able to be expanded, or is it more cost effective to build another whole plant than just expand that station?
So what it affects is it pumps that water back over the hill and goes into the interceptors that start at the soccer fields and come all the way to the plant. Those are big arteries, big tree trunks of the lines that deliver it to the wastewater plant. It will overwhelm those, and then you would have to replace that large pipe from the soccer fields all the way to the wastewater plant, and that's big money. But it's money driven.
Good things to know. Thanks, Chris.
The sewer line maintenance division in our water reclamation fund maintains over 500 miles of sewer lines, over 12,000 manholes. They clean over 1.3 million feet of sewer lines each year, and they inspect and record over 250,000 feet of sewer lines. Over the last 20 years, they've reduced sanitary sewer overflows by 90%. Good job, guys. Water reclamation rate comparison. So Norman's the lowest, Tulsa's the highest. The average here was $59.20 a month, and this is for 10,000 gallons of usage. Norman's rate for 10,000 gallons is $32.10. Tulsa is $114.69, so that might be kind of filling that gap between the water rate and the sewer rate. And then the second lowest was Lawton at $34.75 for 10,000 gallons of usage. So we're pretty competitive here, definitely have some room to grow.
And you guys remember this was Riff Tellis looked at this for us and said we're about $2 light per home per month. If we would go for a rate increase and get it to that, then we would have a solid fund balance for our wastewater fund. Without that, we're scraping on the bottom. We're nervous. I mean, we're asking Steve to hold projects back, but we probably were, and we're trying to get money from Congressman Cole's office. We're just trying some different things to get through, but eventually we're probably going to need a rate increase. And the other thing I've told you many times before is that loan payment of $2.5 million a year, that goes off the books in about 28, 29, so we'll pay off that loan. If we could get to that point, then we would have another 2.5 million to help us.
Yes, ma'am.
So is that something that we vote on, but did Tulsa have to vote on their rate increase for where they're at? So that's just something the city worked its way towards. Okay.
Just their council, not the citizens.
Yeah.
Right.
Just saying.
And a lot of times they'll do like, they'll vote and they'll vote on a rate that increases annually. So they'll do one vote and maybe it'll cover 5 years or something
So
like
it's
that.
a stepped rate.
Right.
Yeah, Lawton does that. Lawton watches a consumer price index, and they just adjust, 0.5% this year, 0.75%, 1%, 2%.
That's kind of what Mustang does too.
Do you think Baptist might suggest a stepped rate increase to get us to where we need to be for some of these?
Remember if they
Yeah.
really addressed that. They didn't say how. They just tell you what your shortage is.
Okay.
And then give it to
Something
us.
like we could do though, if we're like, oh, we really need to be here, like we did under what we really needed for the water rate increase. But maybe if we said, oh, actually, we actually do need all of it, what if we, year one did this rate, year two did this rate, you know?
It might
also
add
hard to-
complexity with the rate vote
You
too,
can put
like,
it on the ballot that way.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's
we've
just-
tried that once before and it was unsuccessful, unfortunately, but that is something you can do. It's all just about how you write the ballot proposition.
Yeah, if more people understood that we didn't actually do the entire amount we needed.
Right.
Yeah.
Isn't it hard to also meter how much sewerage is coming out of out of the house? You make the assumption that water goes in, also comes out, but
That's what we do.
that's all you can
80%
make, it's not
water.
a metered thing like water is.
All right, thank you for the clarity.
Major revenue assumptions for the Water Reclamation Fund, our residential wastewater service rates were raised last in November of 2013. And then our current rates are $5 base plus $2.70 per 1,000 gallons of treated wastewater. User fee revenues for fiscal year 25 are they were budgeted at 3.6% increase from fiscal year 24. And we think that was a little too aggressive, so we will introduce an amendment to reduce that service fee revenue by $775,000, and that'll bring us to 3% below our current year estimates. And this is just due to kind of slower growth on the sewer fund revenues. Our estimated fiscal year 25 ending fund balance with this amendment of $775,000 reduction would be $1.4 million. Expenditure assumptions in the Water Reclamation Fund, major projects completed in fiscal year 24, the line maintenance building, as we saw earlier, this was $8.4 million total, and this was funded with the New Development Excise Tax Fund, which is Fund 322. Major projects for the current fiscal year that will be carried into next fiscal year: dewatering centrifuge replacement at $2.3 million. This was also joint funded with the wet fund. Blower replacement, $2.6 million. 1.8 of that is funded in fiscal year 25. And then digester 3 roof replacement, $250,000. Major projects proposed for fiscal year 25, Water Reclamation Fund facility upgrades, $2 million. And that includes clarifier rehabilitation, non-potable reuse system, screening replacements, instrumentation, and controls. Major projects deferred to fiscal year 26, and this is what they were talking about earlier to fit within those revenue projections. Storage building at $1.1 million, main control building renovation with laboratory $3.5 million. So this is a complicated slide. I tried to translate indirect potable reuse update. This letter is dated March 18th of 2024 from ODEQ. Do you all want to tackle that?
Yeah, we've been working with DEQ because as we talked about our idea of one day being able to take reuse water and augment the lake with it, they're slow to come on board with that, and so we finally did receive our letter that they understand, they're up with us on, up to speed with us on where we're at. Our next step right now is we have it to a National Water Research Institute. We handed this pilot project off to them to review, to see if we've done everything to good code, anything we could do better, to make sure we dotted our I's, crossed our T's before we go to the public and say we've done our due diligence. This is a good idea to put the highly treated wastewater back into the lake as a source to augment. And that helps us too with the other 2 cities, letting them know this is not a bad idea. It could work. We could recycle the water. So it's just where we're at on it. slower than we like, but that's where we're at.
Did I skip a slide? No, that slide's missing, showing this process.
It was hidden because it was the old slide that I think we showed.
Yeah,
like
we
three
Oh,
times.
okay, sorry. So moving on to the sewer maintenance fund, all of this revenue is $5 a month sewer maintenance rate that was approved in 2001. I think Chris, you call it a cheeseburger a month or something.
The mayor at that time did.
All sewer maintenance rate projects must be on a pay-as-you-go basis. And they've rehabbed over 461,000 feet of sewer lines since 2001 with this program. Sewer maintenance fund, major projects completed in next fiscal year? Major project completed in this fiscal year?
I'm sorry, thank
Lift Station D, Force Main, Phase 2, 1.5 million, 1.05 million with the Wastewater Excise Tax Fund. Oliver Woods aerial replacement, 385,000. You can see in this map all the different phases. It's kind of hard to see. But major projects from fiscal 24 carried into 25. So sewer maintenance fund project 18, which is down at the very bottom in green. Yes,
Down
sorry.
by Atwoods kind of area.
So southwest Norman, sorry. That'll go to bid in July, $2.9 million, the budget for that. And then 19 is
by
in
it.
light green right above it. And we're anticipating about 5.4 million on that for construction. And then 22 is, looks like it's northeast or northwest. I'm really terrible with directions.
No, you're okay. So, yeah. So 19 is actually in construction now. They're building that. 18, we were running behind. Our engineers got our markup, so we're trying to get that out as fast as we can. But Councilmember Schuler, I think we had said 22 was going to be where 2027 is shown, but our guys have just said the area up there near Westwood Golf Course is killing them, so they wanted us to reprioritize that was their bigger need. So I wanted to bring that to your attention that we were changing that.
And who did that?
He didn't complain, it was our guys, yeah.
I'm just giving him a hard
And
time.
that's kind of how we approached
We're
this. We
rattling
went
where you-
oldest parts of town first. We went to oldest pipes first. And we're getting up to the 60s, 1960s and 1970s vintage neighborhoods. But if line maintenance says, but I'm struggling over here, we listen to them and we will move to that. And that's what's recently happened.
Yes, sir.
The whole campus is on a different sewer system or what?
They have their own private OU.
It's their own sewer system.
uh
Does
Collection.
not collection, but goes through
But
it.
then they discharge to certain spots of us. And we actually have sewer meters in there where it joins our system.
And then,
They're the one customer that we actually built all their sewer.
We meter theirs, yeah. And we, so kind of how we did that is, we just said, we need you guys to work on your I&I, your leaky pipe, so we don't have a lot of rainwater coming in. And so we said, well, what we'll do is we'll meter it, and we'll charge off of that, so that'll incentivize. If ever they don't want to pay that extra money for the rainwater, they'll start doing projects to tighten that up and just, because they're paying based on that sewer flow meter.
so all these neighborhoods you'd say are built pre-1970?
I think
Do you
we're in
have
the
any
60s and 70s.
earlier neighborhoods or newer neighborhoods than that we're replacing anything in yet?
Yes, I know.
Thinking like the original part of Eagle Cliff or
Yeah.
Oakhurst. Oakhurst is older than 1970.
Crestland Estates had a type of pipe that was a new plastic called truss pipe. I believe we did that one already because it was failing. It was deep and it was crushing in. They tried making a plastic pipe with less plastic, using trusses around the walls of it, and it was failing miserably. So we knocked that one out. I think it's 1980s vintage.
And then, is it right that the sewer maintenance fund rate approved in 2001, is that why we don't have the overflows that we were having in the late 90s apparently? Or that was the solution to stop it or fix it?
It helps. It was kind of like a three-pronged approach when we did that financing. One was go put in bigger interceptors. Okay, it was $35, $40 million for sales tax. And then the other was, if we go out and get these interceptors, get that water to the plant, the other thing we need to do is have these little neighborhood lines tightened up so we're not catching a lot of extra rainwater. And that's when they passed the $5 a month and designated it just for that. And it generates about $3 million a year, and we spend it on pipe replacements in neighborhoods. That's what it's for.
The problem was so bad that development had to be halted, is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
A moratorium on all development in the whole city?
Yeah, before they started that.
It's hard to imagine, isn't it? I can't recall any overflows in my mind that have happened. I mean, like this, the sewer plate coming off the street and stuff
Right.
flowing out of it. I can't recall seeing that in the last 20 years. I don't know.
Right.
At least the time I've been on council, I can't recall anything like that.
We have a few, I mean, it's usually due to blockage, tree roots or something that we can fix. It's, on us, on maintenance, it's not the size of the pipe's too small. I've gone to small towns where they actually have a big boulder rock on the manholes leading to the plant because every time it rains,
Oh, geez.
those float off, so they hold them down.
Yeah. So it got so bad that it stopped development, and then voters approved a monthly rate, but it's never been raised though, right?
Right.
And it applies
Yeah.
to commercial and residential.
Yeah, just
Pay-
smaller lines, yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Oh, it's doing well,
Yeah.
actually. I'd say it's right on.
Chris, what is the Oliver Woods aerial?
Yeah, that was one, we had it's right by south of Lloyd Noble,
Yeah.
those pretty woods there.
Yeah.
Had probably a bird watcher, a nature person walking through there and said, they took a picture and said, it looks like something's going wrong with your sewer line. It was an aerial crossing, kind
Oh.
of attached to an old bridge.
Yeah.
And it was, we got down there and one of those floods or stormwater events washed it all out, our piers. So that thing was about to fall down, the sewer line.
Yeah.
And so we did a rush, got with Daryl, rush bid it. We had a contractor work in the area, got the bid on it and put in a really nice big aerial with piers holding it up. So it'll be there for a long time now.
Was that one of the ones that I sent you?
Maybe.
I got pictures. I remember that.
It was reported to us. We
Over a
wouldn't
little.
have caught it. I mean, it was a good thing.
Nice.
The wet fund revenue is from new construction building permits based on wastewater generated. So this depicts the revenue trends over the last, I guess, 20 plus years. And we always, or the last few years anyway, we've started this budget out at $1.4 million, split between residential and commercial. And these revenues will fluctuate based on construction permits, obviously. So that's why it's kind of up and down depending on the construction industry.
This was that third prong I didn't mention. Growth pays its own way. So we put on fees for wastewater and put that in a fund to pay the portions of growth project.
But how many permits did we do last year? 200 and something? Yeah, it's just a question.
Jane,
Off the top of your head.
302.
302.
Off the top of my head.
Nice. Love it.
The team effort. Fiscal year 25 projected revenues of 1.4 million. Again, as I just mentioned, 1.1 million from residential and then 300,000 from commercial projects. In fiscal year 24, we completed lift station D, Forest Main replacement phase 2, and that's Rock Creek to north of Robinson, just over $1 million. And this was an effort with sewer maintenance fund. And then projects from the current fiscal year ongoing in next fiscal year, water reclamation fund dewatering centrifuges at $1.3 million. This was also split with water reclamation fund 32. And then AIM Norman wastewater master plan update, 850,000. And we have no new projects budgeted or scheduled for fiscal year 25. So the final slide here, and this kind of just gives you an overall picture of total utility rates for these 17 cities. This again is assuming 10,000 gallons of water usage and sewer usage, and then also includes stormwater and any other added utility fees that these cities might have. Like some have like a street light fee. So you can see that Norman is still the lowest. And this also puts a good picture to the Tulsa rate, where their water rate is pretty low and competitive, but then their sewer rate is really high. So overall, they're the highest biller here. And let me give you some average information. If I can find my slide. Where is it? Sorry. Okay. So the average bill here is $150 a month. Norman is $102 a month, so we're the lowest. Did you want to?
I was just going to note that Norman is also larger than 12 of the cities on this list too.
Yeah.
And some of them a lot larger. And some of them are almost double ours, which is interesting. And then Tulsa had a major significant flood years ago that killed people, and then they got real serious about stormwater management. So I think that's part of why theirs is the highest one as far as rate goes. But I always like to point this out when folks talk about Norman being more expensive than other cities, and we're not even close, actually. We're the cheapest city in the metro to live in, and we offer more services than many of those other cities do as well for a cheaper cost. So.
Yeah, I was just, thank you for the breakdown and including stormwater, because it's not actually as much as I thought it would be throughout the cities. I'm surprised more, $1 even on there.
Yeah.
I know
got
Ardmore
it.
just passed theirs, didn't they recently pass the stormwater utility fee?
Who?
Ardmore? Or maybe it was somebody else, I don't know. But it looked like Newcastle, Ardmore, and Norman were the only ones without.
Correct. So there's Norman is one of 3 in the group, so Newcastle and it could be that Ardmore just passed one, but I wasn't able to get their updated rates for this comparison. But Ardmore with prior year rates was the next lowest at $117 for water, sewer, and trash. So, other?
So when we talk about, all of the different funds, right, water, sewer, trash, stormwater, they're their own, like they're supposed to pay their own way for each of those things. So even though Tulsa has a high sewer cost, that's going for all of their sewer costs, right? Like they can't recoup that on the back of, going into the water fund, correct? Like their enterprise funds are self-sustaining. You have to use those things on that. So like, I don't know that it's fair to compare that they have a higher sewer cost, because that should just be going to what their sewer costs are, right? Am I understanding that correctly?
That is correct.
Conceptually, that's right.
Yeah,
Okay.
and yeah, typically what that means is when they jump way up there, they issued a bunch of bonds and had to
Something
do their
for-
next
yeah.
expansion on the plant. So they'll take turns as to who the leader is based on who had the most
Yeah,
recent
I
plant
mean,
expansion.
I guess the only way, I just didn't want to like conflate that. So I guess it is just that like they focused on sewer and now they've shored up that fund. Maybe they'll go back and do a water fund, kind of like we do. We think about what's the most critical need, right? We did water first, and then now we've got, wastewater coming on the backside of that, and then we'll think about upgrading those facilities too. But I just didn't want anyone to think that those funds are flexible,
Right.
that they have to actually go to each of those individual funds for that said purpose.
That's correct.
Conceptually. Now, we'll point
Yeah.
out, it is uncommon in this part of the country, but back east, stormwater and wastewater are often combined. It's one sewer line that's capturing the stormwater and the sewage. And so there'll be a single utility for both of them.
That makes sense.
And I appreciate that statement. I don't want to be misleading saying that they
Sure.
have lower water and higher sewer,
Yeah.
but certainly they do take the whole picture and the total water bill into consideration
Yes.
when considering rates. And that's all I was trying to communicate.
Yes, I understood. I just wanted to make sure that other people were like clear on that, because there's a lot of conflation whenever we talk about raising rates too. And the reason that we have to go to a vote of the people is because prior to all of the restrictions on enterprise funds, they were supplementing the general fund with enterprise. We can't legally do that anymore, but people still talk about that. And so I just know that sometimes that language can get a little confusing for people. So anytime we have an opportunity to clarify, hey, we cannot use enterprise funds to supplement the general fund, These are just going for the projects that we've said that they are going to, like we do when we do any kind of campaign for increasing the rates on these.
And I know Midwest City and Edmond, every once in a while, will take a little bit of sales tax and do a proposal and do some capital projects within their water or sewer off of a sales tax, which we did way back
In
one time.
2001,
We did it once, but we don't do that very often. I mean,
Yeah,
that's,
but even that's different too, right? Because they have to get approval for the sales tax.
they do, yeah. But
So
it's,
that would go out to a vote.
but that rate, that just means
Yeah.
that rate maybe doesn't cover all
All
of
of
their
it.
stuff. They're
Yeah.
getting some other money funded by sales tax or electric, some of them have their own internal electric.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Has there been any more discussion on a stormwater, not a utility, but a use tax or whatever we want to call it, a $5 charge in my mind? Is
For
that- is that-
us, Norman?
Yeah,
We all talk it, I think what we're kind of watching is the AIM process and watching that stormwater subcommittee
okay.
and trying to prioritize those projects because I've heard many people speak that if we had a fund, $3 a home per month or something, just to get it started, I mean, more did the $1, and then tackle some of those projects that our whole city thinks are important, that might be a way to get one started. It's
Pay-go
not a
kind of-
full-blown one like we proposed in the past, but maybe just get something started. That's been talked about and being talked about, but
seeing a
I think they're
dollar.
wanting to prioritize those
get
projects
it
to make sure, how would you pick them?
Listing.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, I got you.
Tried twice.
I know, it's, yeah, you don't wanna fail again, but
Dollar a month is still a dollar a month. You know, it adds up. So
It's more money than we've got right
that's kind of what I
now,
mean. I
designated.
don't think that's a terrible approach.
I think the hardest part is creating it, so
Yeah.
get it for $1 and then
and then show value. I mean, it's, people
Yeah.
wanna know what they get for it.
Yep.
It's just giving them money, they don't want that, but if you show something, build the program.
I was wrong. I Googled Ardmore. They just did a study for stormwater because they also realize it's a problem. And also to your point about value and why do something about stormwater now, I'd say development. We had our ADU meeting. We were discussing with people that 65% impervious is there because we don't have a way to deal with stormwater, especially in the core.
That's all I have. If anybody has any questions or comments or feedback, this is my email address, Anthony's email address, and then our capital project tech email address, because this is a budget presentation, obviously with the enterprise fund experts, so.
They do it for, I mean, they keep us straight. We appreciate finance.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
All right. Item number 2, discussion regarding possible amendments to the contract with Food and Shelter Incorporated for the emergency shelter services. Ms. Shakir, Dominic.
Hello, City of Norman Council, Mayor,
Afternoon.
City of Norman citizens who are listening in. Okay, so, as stated in the last finance meeting, the investigation is in the final draft stages. The responses have been submitted and incorporated into the report from the city manager and city attorney, and most of those recommendations or the agreement or disagreement or agreement with modification has been deferred to council because council are the only ones in the city of Norman who can award a contract. And I just wanted your feedback on each of those recommendations in order for this report to go public. So just take a minute to look at it, or we can go through it one by one.
Why don't you go through it one by one, and that'll just keep us on the same rate.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, so, first comment, followed by the first recommendation, and each comment and each recommendation is followed by the city attorney's response and the city manager's response. I want you all to know that that each recommendation starts with a should, which means there is not a requirement to follow my recommendation. You can agree, disagree, or agree with modification as the city manager and the city attorney has. First comment is the current location of AFH, a friend's house, is owned by the city of Norman and does not meet city of Norman building code compliance standards due to the lack of a sprinkler system. The recommendation follows as the city of Norman should secure a permanent location by lease, purchase, or expedient renovation of the current location to meet city of Norman building code compliance standards at the expense of city of Norman. The city attorney's response follows, agree. As of February 13, 2024, designs for renovation of 109 West Gray Street in the amount of $300,000 have been conducted, completed, and presented to City Council by the Parks and Recreation Department. Direction from City Council to begin renovations has not been given. City manager's response is staff will present council a strategy for consideration. The cost-benefit discussion regarding the time council believes 109 West Gray Street will be utilized as a shelter location and the monthly expenses saved by investing in asbestos mitigation and sprinkler installation. Staff believes that roughly half the cost will be recuperated through the increase in value upon the sale of the property for future development.
Got a question?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Not really a question, I guess a statement. So we had talked about this for several months in oversight about the potential for renovation costs with our project building project manager. And I think it was on hold really from our perspective because we knew that this investigation was going on and kind of thinking about what the recommendation might be to move forward with that. Based on this, it seems that there is a recommendation. We aren't any closer to finding a permanent location for a shelter. That's all in the works. We're still talking about that. But I think based on this that, we should reconsider that and have a discussion about, I guess, the cost benefit, like the city manager said, about updating this to be in compliance with the sprinkler and asbestos abatement.
So Councilmember Schuler, Mr. Purinton put together an RFP. It is going through the review process right now for the potential sale of the Gray Street property that would provide council with some capital that you could choose to invest in a permanent shelter location. And we are pending an appraisal on a piece of property. Council asked us to go forward and take the next steps on. So yeah, those are in the works as we speak. Should have an RFP draft for you, and I won't set a date out there. We'll see if Catherine and Anthony can give you some insight, something.
I just think that it's really important that in all of these moving pieces, when we secure a location, potential sale of that property, like all has to go in a timeline that makes sense. Like we don't want a situation where we're closing a shelter and don't have any option for a shelter. So like thinking about what that timeline looks like and depending on how long that's delayed out, I don't know how, we do a sale. I mean, I guess we can say contingent on us finding a new location and, put years out there. But I want to make sure that we're doing all of those pieces in an order that makes sense. And I'm sure that everybody is considerate of that as well. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So we know that this building is out of compliance. Who's liable if anything were to happen?
So, I think there are exemptions in the Tort Claims Act that would protect the city somewhat if something were to happen. That is what would require a fire watch in the current contract, and why we would want to continue to require one if sprinkler systems are not put in, because that provides protection against that risk. So obviously, that would provide some protection against liability.
Okay, so as long as we have a fire watch that's operating consistently, then that protects us from any kind of lawsuits in the event of a fire?
It helps with the defense of a lawsuit. A tort claim would certainly be filed, no doubt, which would lead to a lawsuit if it were denied. So there's always that risk that a lawsuit would be filed. This is one of the things to mitigate the risk that anything happens to begin with.
Okay, so now even if it were sprinkled, we'd probably see a lawsuit if there were a fire?
If there were a fire, we could. It depends on the situation that led to the fire.
Okay.
In either instance, it would depend on that.
All right.
Comment 2, according to Exhibit A of Contract K-2223-56, fire watch personnel are required to be trained and on-site during hours of operation due to lack of fire sprinkler system. As of December 9, 2023, the date of the fire emergency, fire watch was not present and/or sufficiently trained to fulfill the responsibilities of fire watch. On December 15, 2023, and December 18, 2023, at the request of ACA Puritan, 9 AFH employees received fire watch and fire extinguisher training from Inspector Gregory Burchold of the Norman Fire Department. Recommendation follows as AFH personnel should attend an annual fire watch and fire extinguisher training administered by the City of Norman Fire Department for a friend's house. Additionally, FSI should coordinate with Norman FD Fire Department on a regular basis to keep AFH's personnel's fire watch training current. City Attorney's response, agree with modification. An initial training was provided by the city to all fire watch personnel prior to the shelter opening in November 2022. The city manager's response follows. Staff will facilitate training that can be initiated within 30 days. The goal will be the elimination of the need for fire watch over time and should not be needed in a permanent shelter solution, as adequate infrastructure will be included.
So as I understand it, we're just amending the language to basically say that we're training the staff of a friend's house by our fire department so that we can maintain fire watch and the fire extinguishers and all of that.
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Recommendation number 3. It's all questions?
Oh, yes.
Sorry.
So how quickly can we get Chief King to put together a training schedule for the annual
Oh, absolutely.
training?
Yeah.
Is-
I
So-
think they recently did an additional training.
Yes.
Well, training, but I want to see a schedule that actually lays out a plan to continue keeping this thing, these personnel up to date. Or is there any guarantee that these individuals in fire watch are going to be there for the rest of the year? Or is there a plan to train new fire watch as they come up? Like I'm a little vague on what the fire watch is. Are those individuals that are staying there? Are those individuals that are hired by the city? Is that somebody hired from outside?
Those are not individuals hired by the city. That was on the shelter operator to provide personnel for fire watch.
Oh, and the responsibility should be on them to be training individuals in fire watch.
I don't know enough about the training to know if it's preferable to have someone from the fire department do each training, or if they could train someone to train others. You know what I mean? But certainly the fire department could be contacted. I'm thinking if in the contract amendment, maybe it's a training required quarterly. Like you said, a schedule so that you're catching any new employees, in that cycle and getting them trained. That's certainly something we could put in the contract and provide.
Okay.
That's kind of where my thoughts are going to with new employees. How are they staying up to date? Or if there's like just a quarterly or whatever training, so those people who were taught stay refreshed, as it were. Some people forget, especially in an emergency.
As I recall, the OSHA requirement for that, this doesn't apply, but that is a similar, was once a year, and you had to have a practical training. The fire watch themselves must be awake during all that time and roving during all that time.
And there's a lot they have to complete. When the initial lease was done, it was for a term of 4 months, opening November 1 and closing at the end of March, I believe. And so an initial training was done for that 4-month period. It wasn't addressed in contract amendments. it wasn't addressed in the contract at all. I don't think the training aspect, that's something we want to put in there and make sure that we're providing, to make sure that, you know, we're ensuring the safety of the residents.
Ready for 3?
Yep.
Comment 3, FSI terminate the security provider's contract without prior notification to the city manager or city council. 2 of the security contractors' former contracted security personnel were hired as overnight shelter monitors while potentially lacking bond insurance and potentially possessing compromised CLEAT licenses. There are currently 3 security advocate personnel that may have compromised CLEAT licenses or lack a license in its entirety. Recommendation, contract K-2223-56 should be amended to include an authorization and approval clause, which requires the contractor to make written requests and to obtain written consent from the city manager before making any major changes to AFH operations that increase the likelihood of associated risks and the associated impact. Requests for changes to budget or funding should go to city council for approval. Additionally, FSI should furnish CLEAT certifications or licenses and insurance as it relates to current security personnel assigned to or employed at AFH at the expense of FSI or its personnel hired as security advocates. City Attorney's response follows as agree, although the contract does not require FSI to provide notice related to operational changes that are not dictated by contract language, the contract language can be amended to reflect this recommendation with the agreement of FSI and council. Management response 3 as follows, as staff is in support of modifications to the security section of the operating agreement to reflect council's risk tolerance. Staff will seek best practice information on the subject through various sources in the metro to share with council prior to contract amendment language is considered.
Thoughts or comments? I would assume that this would be an automatic thing that we would do because it's the safest thing to do, have trained personnel in there and just modify the contract. Does that, and go ahead.
I was gonna say, I like the idea of best practice information to find out what is keeping people safe and maybe even more trafficked locations than just ours, to better implement that.
Councilmember Peacock?
Yeah, I mean, I know we're only on comment number 3, but I'm just gonna make a blanket statement that I'm in favor of any recommendation that mitigates our exposure to risk as a city. And it's not really that I think a friend's house is doing anything wrong, it's that I wanna make sure we don't undermine the trust of the public and that we don't jeopardize a long-term solution at a future location.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback off that too. I think that this is a lack of us understanding like what was going to necessarily be needed for a long-term contract with our provider. And so I think just kind of a lot of this is cleanup language. It's not not necessarily to say that things are going afoul with our contract. It's just these are needed changes as we have grown and as we're thinking about the continuation of a shelter over time, not just like a 6-month kind of period, but something that is a little bit more long-standing.
Yes, sir.
To be on a completely unbiased playing field, I'm not going to assume that Friends House is doing anything necessarily wrong. I'm not going to assume that they're doing anything right either. How quickly can we get these modifications in and put into place so that we can make sure that we are covered?
We're currently on a month-to-month contract, so it's just a matter of sitting down with Food and Shelter and determining what they're agreeable to and drafting the language. So it could be a fairly quick turnaround depending on the nature of the changes.
So within the next 2 weeks?
Possibly. It just depends on how quickly we can.
When I hear somebody from the city say it can be quick, I think, okay, so somewhere between 1 day and 1 year.
It's all relative, right? I would say, I think we can get our initial draft done in 2 to 3 weeks. We just want to have time to be able to negotiate and determine final language and give them time for their board to consider it. So I would hope we could have it on maybe your last meeting in June or first meeting in July as an amendment, but all of that will depend on how quickly, if they're agreeable to all the changes, and then how quickly their board can consider those changes.
Okay, and if they're not agreeable to the changes,
We will report back.
neat. All right, thank you.
What is the nature of the compromise of the licenses? Just not training dates taken care of as they're supposed to, or?
I'm not sure.
The licenses, those provide for license security with the situations that have been notified to the Norman PD with assaults, lacerations, and the events that happen at a friend's house. I think that trained licensed security would mitigate the risk of further injury to folks or maybe even a fatality.
Thank you.
Ready for comment 4, council? Comment 4, a cost analysis of the cost proposal was not conducted prior to the contract award to assess adequate operational and budget needs for actual startup costs, payroll expenses, payments to subcontractors, and monthly operational expenses. Recommendation is as follows. Due diligence should be performed and a cost analysis based on actual costs should be conducted periodically for budget proposals to assess and reassess actual costs of contract and amended contracts. City Attorney's response as follows. Agree. The initial contract was negotiated in a very short time frame due to council direction to place it on the October 11, 2022 agenda. The anticipated costs to operate the shelter were estimated at that time based on the city's experience with its own shelter and in consultation with FSI. City manager's response is as follows. Staff agrees with the city attorney response. Contract will be more reflective of cost average and agreed upon overhead recovery. Questions for that? Questions, comments?
None. Oh, there is.
I want to ask how quickly, but
Quickly, it will be possible.
yeah, I know.
It would have to be part of the contract amendment, so I think my previous comments, I'll just stand on this.
By June.
End of June or first meeting in July.
Of 24.
Ditto for the rest of it. Don't ask the question
That's the
again.
correct.
All right, comment?
Comment 5. Comment 5. There was a lack of oversight and/or lack of follow-up and monitoring caused by limited personnel resources, the critical nature of the event, and emergency response of the event as it relates to operational expenditures. Oversight includes, but is not limited to, performing audits periodically by requesting intake logs, fire watch logs, incident reports, HMIS records, invoices, receipts, and payroll records related to AFH on a monthly basis to assess actual expenditures. Recommendation is as follows. The city manager's office and the city attorney's office should coordinate continuous monitoring efforts to ensure compliance with contract K-2223-56 and all other city contracts with FSI. The city attorney's response is as follows. Agree with modification. The additional monitoring recommended would need to be addressed in a future contract amendment. The negotiated monthly fee, although based on operational estimates, was intended to reflect the negotiated cost for FSI to provide the requested services. Care should be taken to ensure the city is not directing FSI's performance of the services in a manner that would harm FSI's status as an independent contractor of the city, as that status protects the city from liability related to the shelter's operations. The city manager's response is as follows. Although the contractor generated monthly reports, there were no standards developed in the contract by which the reports were evaluated. This scenario will be rectified in an amended contract for service. Monthly monitoring and analysis of contract compliance will be written into the amended service contract. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Comment number 6. A review of FSI's documentation procedures as it relates to AFH's intake logs and incident reports are inconsistent and insufficient. Intake logs and incident reports are not regularly submitted or forwarded to the city manager's office. Payroll records and expenditure reports related to AFH were not requested by the city or submitted by FSI. recommendation is as follows. The contractor FSI should provide all related detailed and complete documentation, including but not limited to intake logs, fire watch logs, incident reports, HMIS records, invoices, receipts, and payroll records related to AFH on a monthly basis. Additionally, FSI should keep all records safely stored and available to Norman City officials for at least 5 years after the contract has ended. City Attorney's response is as follows. Agree with modification. The current contract does not require receipts for expenditures to be regularly submitted or forwarded to the City Manager's office, as compensation for services provided wasn't on a reimbursement basis. If the City Council desires to impose such requirements to the service contract, staff should include such a requirement in a future contract amendment. Care should be taken to ensure the city is not directing FSI's performance of the services in a manner that would harm FSI's status as an independent contractor of the city, as that status protects the city from liability related to the shelter's operations. City Manager's response is as follows. Staff agrees with City Attorney Response 6.
Matt?
I think this is a question for Catherine. Is 5 years long enough? What's the statute of limitations on stuff like this?
I think 5 years would be long enough for most claims. I think it's also in keeping with the state statute requirements for record retention.
Okay,
So I think that's sufficient.
perfect, thank you.
Councilmember Shu?
Yeah, I was just gonna agree with, the city attorney's, agree with modification, just based on, what was indicated here about, independent contract status, and then, also the way that we're not necessarily doing a reimbursement, and I think that gets really tedious, not only for our staff, but their staff. So we should be packaging the contract like we had done previously. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, and the previous recommendation about doing a cost analysis, I think will give us a good number to use as a cost for the service, without necessarily having to go and document every single, trip to Sam's to buy toilet paper, those kind of things.
Yeah.
On a reimbursement basis.
I think that's overkill.
Yeah, I kind of think it's interesting just thinking about the future and what a 24/7 one might cost to run. I just had a question around care should be taken to ensure the city is not directing FSI's performance of services in a manner that would harm FSI's status as an independent contractor. What are some examples of potentially doing that?
So you want to be careful that you're not, as it says, directing their performance. And the reason you do that is so that you take on more of an employer-employee relationship, and then you have all that responsibility. Under state law, there are 20 factors that can be looked at to determine that. So it is very fact-specific. There are some recommendations in here that I worry more than others about potentially directing the operations too much, telling them, what kind of training their workers need to have, other than fire watch, but, social worker type folks, or, I think I said this on the same thing about calling them guests versus clients, things like that, where I think we could potentially get a little too into directing the operations in a way that would potentially lead to liability for us.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Accessibility to these logs, and I think this doesn't have to be cemented into this one comment or item right now, but I'd like to see some kind of streamlined accessibility so that if we wanted to review these records, especially with incident reports, if there are any incident reports, to those could be made quickly available to council so that we're ready to respond to any questions that might come from constituents regarding something they might hear. We can put those facts to rest before they get blown out of hand.
And I think the current contract requires that they be provided monthly. So I think that's something we may want to increase to within 7 days or something, and have that provided to a designated staff person who could then share that with council.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just also thinking, since we get the monthly reports at oversight, it would make sense for that to also come to that committee, as we're talking about that, and then it can be discussed, with the provider or the contractor.
Yeah, anything severe, anything that would result in headlines.
Which would come kind of from our streamline, this was the previous one of like the report and kind of what the expectations are. And then we would have kind of a standardized way that we go about analyzing that each month.
And I think personally, this will help answer the question, where's the money going? How is it being spent? Are we being efficient with their money? And that's a good question. That's a totally good idea.
Ready for comment seven?
7, yeah.
Comment 7, and this is what City Attorney Catherine was alluded to. Individuals experiencing homelessness and seeking shelter at AFH are referred to as guests. This determination obscures the roles and responsibilities the city and FSI have to the homeless population in the program. Recommendation is as follows. Guests should be referred to as clients to reflect the City of Norman's commitment to provide social services such as transitional housing and case management to the underserved, homeless, and transient population of the City of Norman. City Attorney's response 7 is as follows. Disagree. Social service providers often have their own terminology to refer to recipients of their services. For example, Thunderbird Clubhouse, refers to its service recipients as members. Other agencies refer to them as consumers. FSI refers to service recipients at its main location as guests. If council determines this to be a necessary change, staff can attempt to negotiate such a requirement in a contract amendment. Care should be taken to ensure the city is not directing FSI's performance of the services in a manner that would harm FSI's status as an independent contractor of the city, as that status protects the city from liability related to the shelter's operations. Management response 7 is as follows. Staff recognizes reasoning identified in recommendation 7. Staff recognizes the opportunity to reflect the term client and contractual language between the city and the contractor. Staff recognizes the contractor will most likely continue to use the term guest in their daily interactions with the population they serve.
I was gonna say, client, I get it, but I understand that part of the way that food and shelter operates with its guests is the language reflects like what they are when they show up and how they behave when they're there. I do think Daryl's response was a nice balance between the two for at least the city and food and shelter, while acknowledging that food and shelter is likely to keep using guests. So.
Yeah, I would concur with Councilmember Grant. I think that the city manager kind of struck a nice balance between the language of our contract, but also I would like our service provider to be able to utilize words that are in keeping with, industry standard within kind of working with the unhoused population. And I mean, I think the idea here is that they're setting up a space that is welcoming. It's not clinical. It is, come as you are. We are providing a service and that you are a guest here. And I think that does help people feel more ownership of the space and kind of the community that is being built there. So I'm okay with them continuing to use the word guest within kind of the space with working with the population, but also recognizing client maybe what we need in our contract language.
I will say in the current contract, client is used primarily. There's four uses of the word client and 1 use of the word guest. So that's just an easy cleanup item.
Yes, sir.
I think whatever we need to do to avoid popping that bubble that exposes us to liability. If we disrupt that relationship, then they can start pointing the finger at us to be on the hook for any kind of incident that might occur.
Any other questions, comments to number 7? No.
8.
Comment 8, sorry. The Norman Police Department and Norman Fire Department emergency call log indicated 121 calls were made from November 2022 through January 2024. citing reasons such as including but not limited to overdoses, hemorrhage, or lacerations, and assault. The remaining calls majorly related to emergency health issues. Recommendation 8 is as follows. In efforts to achieve safer conditions for AFH client base, the city and the contractor should raise AFH's entry barrier by employing the use of metal detection wands and/or metal detectors. City attorney's response is as follows. Agree. If council would like to require the use of metal detection wands and/or metal detectors for entry into the shelter, it can be included in a future contract amendment. Additional costs should be considered in relation to the reduction of risks identified in comment 8. City manager's response is as follows. Staff will implement risk reduction efforts up to and including the installation of metal detecting equipment upon council's request. The utilization of such equipment and other risk reduction efforts should be listed as required activities in an amended service contract.
Who's gonna pay for it? That's my question. Wands, I don't know how much a wand is, but
We recently purchased such equipment for YFAC. So Mr. Olson has some, we've got recent purchase orders, so that's equipment we know how to buy, and we can bring back that cost estimate as part of the amendments to the contract.
and then it doesn't require additional, it shouldn't require that much additional training to wand.
No, it's relatively simple
Which are-
operation.
Question of how the shelter brings people in and whether it requires additional personnel up front. Doing the wanding and checking in and those kind of
Oh, I'll keep it just.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I would just note that that breaks down to 8 calls a month.
Okay.
So I don't know if it really rises to the level of an expense or not, but especially if that's 8 total calls per month, and I don't know that all 8 of those involve knives or something that a metal detector would catch. So, cost benefit, is it really
We did
a problem or not?
contact Neighborhood Alliance in Oklahoma City, and they did describe that as part of their entry process. So,
Homeless Alliance?
Homeless Alliance, thank you. Like FFA, FAA, yeah. all that.
Kristen's acronyms, yes, ma'am.
Oh, actually,
Oh,
Yeah, I'd support it. I think it's a best practices thing, and I kind of like city manager was alluding to, how City Care does it in Oklahoma City is they actually have a uniformed Oklahoma City police officer, stand to the front, you get wanted, you get your weapons confiscated, or you get your drugs confiscated, but when you leave the facility, they give it all back to you. And so it's not like we're taking things from people, it's just keeping people safe while they're in the facility. I think that is perfectly reasonable.
I was gonna say, I don't wanna speak for April, but I kind of remember a conversation where people are turning things over and putting them up in a tote. But I also just really wanted to ask about like the overdoses, cause like metal detectors isn't going to
no.
do anything about that.
That's gonna happen with the population. It just is,
Yeah. Anyways, just wanted to ask about that. What are we doing for overdoses now?
Usually a 911 call, and whether a police officer or a fire engine show up first, both of those responders know what to do in such an incident. And depending, they're gonna keep Narcan, et cetera, on them.
Overdoses probably happen more than assault and lacerations.
That I couldn't tell you. I don't know if we have the detail in those response reports to identify the nature of the
But that kind of
response.
goes back to another comment about log keeping and incidents, so you can kind of parse that out.
Yeah.
and frankly, you won't get all the knives or sharp weapons with a wanding, because you can make a styrofoam cup into a pretty good knife.
Or a plastic fork.
Or a plastic fork.
Knife
I mean,
can
it's
be
just-
sharpened down.
Nothing's going to be foolproof, but to increase the safety of the residents that are there and persons that are around there. It may deter some people from carrying those items in that may be able to seriously injure another person.
We would argue that if you took all the prudent steps that are best practices and something still happened, you provided yourself another layer of risk management.
Yeah, I'm just trying to kind of understand or just think about. I think that part of the conversation that we're having too is about safety of staff and people that are staying at the shelter. And I think it gets back to an earlier conversation about the security and making sure that those individuals are properly trained. And so I think that there's some other ways that we can mitigate this without maybe the incurred expense of providing metal detectors right now. I mean, to Councilmember Holman's point, 8 calls. I mean, like, there are things on here. But I mean, what we've been reported to this point in oversight, that the majority of calls are health emergencies, which is just, individuals experiencing, something going on with their health. I mean, these are individuals that don't regularly get to go to medical facilities because of lack of insurance and various things. So things are going to happen, but I think mitigating on the front end with proper trained security can help with, I would say the small amount of potential incidents that we've had related to, a stabbing or a whatever. But I'd like to see more data from the logs on what are the actual incidents, how many are we getting of each thing, that I think will help us make a decision moving forward. So I'd prefer to punt this one on the metal detectors until we get some more information. And then since we are month to month, we could come back with a contract amendment in the future if necessary.
Exactly, and it may be a thing council considers to have built in a permanent shelter solution, and it's just part of the construction package.
Yeah, but I think that there are other things that that we're working through in all of these recommendations that could help mitigate some of those things, and then we can make a determination moving forward if that's an expense that, it's just my personal thought.
Yeah, I would imagine that piece of gear's a couple of $1,000, so.
Would you like to see data?
Right now, or?
Do you have it?
Yes.
So in the yellow, down here is hemorrhages and lacerations for 5, overdoses or poisonings for 4, traumatic injuries for 4, convulsions in the remaining of them. We have 1 burned and explosion for 2.
Is it a burn or an explosion?
It's how the fire department reports it in their data log. So here is the actual, and I tried to, so the incident report details come from the AFH's incident logs. I tried to match them up with the dates and times of the call. Sometimes the dates are actually the day before or day after on the incident report, but the time is the exact time, and the fall or the reason for the call and the incident report details match up.
So data
So
we
for
got.
these, there's no incident, sorry. So for these, there's no incident reports given from January 23 until September 23. And then you kind of get a disjointed incident report, even though you have calls.
Do we have to work on the fire department? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so the, I guess, hemorrhage / lacerations, do we know what caused them? Because those are just medical things that could happen, or they came in with an already having a laceration from, the day, and then it's found and it's, bleeding excessively, or you've got hemorrhage. Like, those are still medical potential. Like, we're extrapolating that they are from, a weapon, but they may not be. So I think having an incident report that is, to understand what actually is happening there, is really important, which is, again, why I'll say, since we have inconsistent data now, moving forward, if we have standards for this, we'll be able to better understand what is actually happening, because that can look really scary,
Agreed,
but it might not be.
agreed.
Councilmember Holman?
That was kind of my same question about if someone, a guest or client, whichever one, stays or is injured, they cut themselves and they go to the shelter. Staff sees it, staff calls 911 to come get them. It would show up as an incident at the shelter, but I would just wonder how many incidents actually are happening inside it,
Yeah.
or if someone that's staying there, something happens to them and they show up and staff calls to get them taken care of. So, yeah, I think having more detailed data as it go forward would be real helpful for us.
And we would really, really appreciate if an individual showed up at the shelter with some kind of injury that shelter staff is saying, you know, we really need to talk to a doctor about this one. You shouldn't go to bed with that issue unaddressed. That would, I think would be a basic standard of care. And this is maybe that only point of contact with maybe a good decision maker some of these folks get. At any point during the day. So that is entirely possible, and without kind of some reporting standards that we want to achieve. If the question's not asked, we're not gathering the data to answer the question. So these are great questions for us to be able to expand on and be able to answer going forward.
Yes, ma'am.
I saw on the previous spreadsheet where it said assault where EMS was needed was 3 total. In the one spreadsheet with all the fire and EMS, so it's, if I understand correctly, the shelter doesn't have an incident report and EMS doesn't have one, and that's why it's blank?
Right.
Okay.
So those reports come from 28, 820, and 91. So 128, there's no report from food and shelter. And 820 and 91. There's no reports as well.
So it should be kind of concerning, right?
Yes.
I have those reports, they're just on paper, and I offered them to her and she didn't want them.
Well, we'll work on that. All right.
I was just curious, so does EMS, are they required to do a report too? Like,
Yeah, but they're a hospital, not us. So,
It does make me wonder if,
They're
like,
not
systems, are they all HIPAA?
yeah.
I don't know what they would
protected?
share.
Yeah.
And
But worth an ask.
We can ask Early, you'll know.
And then what other parts that the city controls, that we noticed fire also wasn't submitting one?
And fire, depending on what service they provide when they get there, there is a system where the EMT guys key in what medication they administered and what services they provided. That goes to the ambulance system, so they don't give you the same meds that the paramedics already gave you. So there is a string of communication that goes all the way to the hospital should the patient require transport, winds up in the hospital.
The reason I ask is because, like, just thinking liability wise, it's like if something were to become a lawsuit, it would also be like, here's the documentation from both the shelter and the first responders, and I kind of think that would be really important in a lawsuit situation. So
So our ability to sit down with our EMTs, our paramedics, and kind of walk through what information is typical, what do you gather, what could be shared, and we recognize that if it's a report that's going to council, it's public record, so there may be names redacted, and we don't need to know anybody's name. That's not pertinent to the task at hand. But yeah, those are questions we did not ask in the original contract, but we'll work with staff and they understand what data goes to the ambulance service. So our attorneys will know what we think we need that would provide us the answers to your questions and a good level of liability coverage.
yeah, I could see it. It's just like age, maybe gender, incident. You know, it doesn't have to be really in the weeds and details about like what happened that led to a fight or whatever.
Right.
That would actually be us crossing the line in the management, if we got it. What you're saying with age, gender, what happened, brief, that I think would work and not cross the line.
Yeah, that would be fine. I mean, I think there are probably ways to access that information as long as the report's done on the fire or EMS or police side.
That would make sense. Let's go to 9. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just real quick, it's kind of my ignorance of how the process works. If you call in an assault EMS, does that trigger a police escort as well with that? Do police arrive with EMS?
I would,
I'm just kind of curious.
I would guess so. I mean, the calls are being dispatched through 911, so I would assume that if it sounds like a criminal action plus medical, they'll send police and EMS.
Just another group to maybe give an incident report and help paper trail.
Yes.
Thank you.
Vital. Comment number 9, bear with me, it's a bit long. Clients and potential clients that present behavioral issues are asked to leave the facility without receiving a referral to another shelter or social services program. During the City Council oversight meeting on December 14, 2023, the Executive Director of FSI stated anybody who is violent or persistently disruptive cannot stay at AFH. I know that it's not good for Main Street because they have to be outside. Incident reports also indicate banned clients are refused future stays at the shelter. Additionally, clients and potential clients that are visibly inebriated and/or intoxicated are not allowed to stay at the shelter. During the City Council oversight meeting on February 8, 2024, the Executive Director of FSI stated people who get drunk all day, 2023, people who get drunk all day don't get to stay in the shelter, so they make a decision. Continues, we do see a lot of people edit their behaviors, edit their drinking and drug use because they know that's an avenue to make sure their bed is there at night. This increases the risk to the public to be affected by homeless individuals with behavioral issues or who are intoxicated and/or inebriated. Incident reports from 2023 and 2024 indicate non-emergency and emergency calls are made to Norman PD to remove intoxicated, banned clients, and violent and/or belligerent clients from the property. There is no record identified related to their destination upon removal from the shelter. Recommendation 9 is as follows. If a client is visibly inebriated and/or intoxicated upon intake and refuse the bed due to their state of inebriation and/or intoxication, they should be referred to the appropriate detox program or sobering center for the night. This is to ensure the safety of individuals who may appear to be a potential harm to themselves or others as a result of behavioral issues, intoxication, or inebriation. City Attorney's response 9 is as follows. Disagree. There is not currently a detox program that a service recipient could be referred to for the night. Any person attempting to check into the shelter when visibly inebriated and/or intoxicated should be assessed for safety and ability to follow shelter rules prior to admission. City Manager's response is as follows. Staff will request the participation of leadership in the Norman Police Department to assist in developing protocol to follow in the event an individual is deemed too intoxicated to take a bed in the shelter. The goal would be to ensure no one turned away becomes a danger to themselves or the public in the time between being asked to leave the shelter and regaining personal control. Such protocol could become an exhibit in an amended service contract.
And counsel, the thought that, and we're thinking about this even from a medical response, the thought that now we have recognition this person's not in a good place, they need to be handed off to somebody. And I'm sure this is a thing our police department addresses regularly with individuals that, may be walking out of a bar and really not in good shape, but definitely aren't driving home. Just so we have protocol in place. So everybody understands what happens if you get turned away because of one of these issues, that you don't wander out into traffic on Gray Street and get center punched and now everybody's looking to point fingers.
Actually, Councilmember Kubak was first.
No.
Thank you. No, that's kind of my same line of thinking. I know that we don't have a program that these individuals could go participate in, but I don't think that the default option of just allowing them to remain on the streets, unserviced, potentially or risk to themselves and, just wandering out of traffic, as the city manager alluded to. I just think there needs to be a plan in place here. But the only thing I worry about is, bordering on that, directing Friend's House how to run their operations. I don't want to run afoul of, us trying to set the rules, but there needs to be some kind of safety net here.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was next. Okay, whew. Well, I know we're working on a sobering center, and I don't know how far along we are there. I wonder if the default answer will become a night in the county jail, because I don't think there is another answer right now. And I just really wonder about throwing drunk people in jail because there's no other place for them. So if we do develop another protocol, it'd be nice to see what alternatives, maybe alcohol poisoning, obviously ER visit, what thresholds of inebriation, or I don't know, potentially overdose. It's really, you never know when you come across somebody on the street with an issue, what exactly is going on. Huh?
It's not just alcohol, so yeah.
But I do think it would be good to have a protocol that maybe we've come up with and tell Food and Shelter, hey, if we have to turn someone away,
Call
here's
this
an
number, here's
option.
what happens.
I would also, I also think too, it's also not just homeless people. There are some randoms, but liability wise, I'm just thinking about like when somebody gets turned away, because there was that guy that walked into Scratch that didn't even go to the shelter. So if somebody was actually injured and wanted to sue us because we let this person out, I mean, obviously we have no record of them, and so probably better evidence for winning a lawsuit. But I do wonder like what the liability is when it is somebody that we are like, our operator says you cannot stay here tonight, so.
And I'm sure
Tough question.
there's best practices out there in our neighboring agencies as well, so we'll track that down.
So, in terms of liability, right, we have the liability, we are immune from liability from acts or omissions of an independent contractor. So if the independent contractor's actions are, to turn somebody away when they shouldn't have, or if they needed to call someone else, which, whether or not they would be liable for that is a different story. Right, we are immune from that if it's an act of or omission of the contractor. That's why it's so important if we start, layering all of these requirements, we require them to turn someone away, or we require them to do a certain thing, but that certain thing we're requiring is not the correct thing that they should have done. Now are we in the position where we required too much? They're no longer an independent contractor, and now we're suffering the liability. So that's the tightrope that is we were kind of referring to. So just to keep that in mind.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that context is really helpful. My concern was also that we've been talking about a sobering center. We need one. I know that the police department would like to have a place to take people. I'm also thinking about when the new Red Rock Behavioral Health facility will be built. Like that's another opportunity, but again, down the road, nothing that we have in place right now. And I'm also concerned about, just taking people to county jail. Like, that's just a concern, I guess, always. I understand that, like, public intox is not legal, and, they could be if they were just out on the street, but, like, I prefer that, our police department handle that as necessary. And I think, based on the context that Anthony just said, that if we get too far in creating policies and all that kind of stuff, like the police already have a policy for public intox, and if they get a report of that, so if, say, a friend's house reports that, that would just be normal, right? That the police department would carry on with their normal protocol. They would, respond to that said location, and that person may wander down the street if they're not allowed, and it's seeming like they're already not letting people in that are visibly intoxicated. They're under the influence of some.
And I think this happens now if someone appears to be in need of medical assistance because they are so intoxicated that they're in danger. I think 911 is being called now.
Yeah.
what our police do. That is come out and assess. Doesn't necessarily mean you go to jail. If you can get a ride, you can get, I'm
Right.
just thinking of college kids even. If you can get a ride home, or you can get home safely, or to a safe place safely, then that's fine. Could require a fit. If we're gonna arrest someone, they're gonna make sure that they're seen medically, to make sure they're okay if they appear to be really.
Yeah, it's just as we talk through some of these things, it really is a identification of gaps that we have in our service network more broadly than just kind of what is happening at the shelter, but things that we need to identify within the community of, safety nets and gaps and, things that we might need to close, but I don't know that we can address all of them with one single contractor and one single location.
And it's also figuring out who's liable, not who's liable, but who ought to do that.
Right.
Because my opinion is that's the county, but that person would have to be trained. Just being drunk or just being high is too simple. There are so many other things that might go wrong, and
For
that's what I worry about. And that's what happens in the jail. Yes, sir.
I think we definitely need a sobering center. We have been talking about it for a long time. We used to have one in Norman or Cleveland County when we were a much smaller county and city. Former Sheriff Gibson was real adamant about the need for it and was pursuing that until he decided not to be sheriff anymore. And I think he, as chief of police and more, I know that he is still very supportive of that being a Norman police, county. I have not heard Sheriff Amison ever talk about it. Maybe he has, but I haven't heard it. And I'd probably be interested to see what the three candidates for sheriff have. I don't know if they even think about it, if it's something on their radar, but it's something the sheriff and county commissioners would have a lot of ability to push, especially since it would serve all the law enforcement agencies in the county instead of, and I agree, we know how much it costs to take someone to county jail.
Yep.
It's expensive.
What we're paying per person per day. And so if it's somebody who's they've had too much to drink, I definitely don't want them in county jail unless they're breaking the law and causing harm to other people. So I think that's maybe a separate thing, but it's something we, as a community and county, need to really be pushing for. Our county's third largest county. We don't have, and a university, there's people walking around drunk all the time. So it's, and maybe very innocently too. And, them ending up in jail because of it, they tripped over the curb or something, it's not the best thing. And it would help shelter staff too, if we could, like I said, not have to turn people away and then just go wandering around drunk. But hey, we're gonna make sure we get you to the sobering center, we're gonna take care of you. So.
Yeah, and it could end up as a medical emergency.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't know, so, yes, sir.
I'm pretty alarmed at the idea that they're turning people that are visibly intoxicated away, telling them to stay in public intoxicated. And I understand that we can't tell them exactly how to handle those situations, but we can tell them to find an improved way of doing things and to keep a log of these instances, like with the Able Commission, if you do have to do anything, refuse any one kind of service, you have to add it to an incident log. So I don't think that'd be going too far to require them to keep a log of every time they turn somebody away, and for those logs to be accessible to us, and then we can cross-check to see if there's any incidents in the community as a consequence of them turning visibly intoxicated people over into the surrounding community. And if that starts causing a problem, then either they can find a better way to provide their service, or we can find somebody else to replace them. At least some kind of leverage to tell them to figure out how to do this service better, or we'll explore whatever options we can to find somebody who can do this service better.
We can add that to the reporting so we have more data about how often that even happens.
And also, to address just a small thing, so like, because of it, it's, categorization as a low barrier shelter, right? Like, there is specific language in the contract that says, well, I think that just because someone's physically and like visibly intoxicated doesn't necessarily mean they would be turned away. It's only when that becomes an issue with behavior and being able to follow the rules of the shelter that's that person turned away. So, just a small clarification there on like what the contract language says. And they also have to, you know, in the contract right now, I think, develop procedures on how they do that. So if we can probably narrow that down and kind of flesh that out a little bit more, especially if I think this is going to come up later when we talk about a permanent shelter, but, you know, defining a little bit more in detail what a low barrier shelter is and the lines that we draw there. So.
Yeah, we should definitely use this as a motivation to work a little faster to find a more permanent and more holistic solution to these problems.
Yeah, I was just gonna add to the low barrier part. I don't know that we would get a no barrier shelter in the current state of things. Who knows? Is anybody operating a no barrier shelter in Oklahoma City or Tulsa?
No barrier?
Yeah, no barrier.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. And then just to go back to the sobering center, I can't remember if it was CPTC or oversight when we had the presentation on a sobering center. Maybe it was oversight. But I do remember there was one individual arrested like 48 times in 1 year. And I honestly think the long-term answer here for these situations is that sobering center, because not only do you get taken there and processed and made sure that you're not going to die from an overdose or alcohol poisoning, but then you are guaranteed a ride home and you're given services about addiction treatment. So just the thing that needs to go in the landscape with the 24/7 solution.
Okay, let's do 10.
Comment 10. A field visit by the City of Norman City Auditor to the AFH facility on December 13, 2023 indicated AFH personnel may be administering medication to clients. A medicine cabinet with first aid and Narcan appeared to be unlocked and accessible. Recommendation 10 is as follows. AFH is a part of Norman's continuum of care, of Cleveland County, sorry. AFH personnel that are responsible for administering medication should receive approved medication assistive personnel training and certification, which is otherwise called AMAP, at the expense of the contractor FSI. See Oklahoma Admin Code, Section 310-663-19-2, Medication Administration. If FSI personnel will be administering prescribed medication, a registered nurse on staff by volunteer or hire should be present to supervise the administration of medication to clients. City Attorney's response is as follows. Agree with modification. I am aware of training for medication administration through vocational technical programs, and if employees are handing out medication, they should receive training for medication administration. At a minimum, employees of the shelter should be trained in first aid and Narcan administration. Other than first aid and Narcan administration, it may be more prudent for FSI to adopt a policy forbidding employees from administering prescription medication. It should be noted that allowing guests or clients to access their own medication that is securely stored on site during hours of operation, e.g. unlocking a safe and providing clients access to medication stored within, would not likely be considered administration of medication. CEG 63 Oklahoma Statute 2-101. Management responses is as follows. Staff recognizes this recommendation as a risk reduction function. Staff will facilitate a focused discussion on this and the balance of the risk reduction elements highlighted when considering contract amendments. Staff's goal is to ensure the council has information necessary to make an informed decision regarding this scenario that is certain to occur regularly.
Seems to me it ought to be more, as it says, more prudent to let them do their own thing, just like in public school, just like at work. That would just be something to add into that so they can stay out of trouble, and so can we.
Ready for comment 11? Comment 11. On March 8, 2023, the executive director was interviewed by City Auditor Shakira Kalnick and ACA Puritan was present. An inquiry was made regarding the need for 8 HMIS licenses as indicated in the expanded shelter budget for a budget of $500 per license or $4,000 in total. In the interview, the executive director stated the cost of an HMIS license was approximately $500. According to Oklahoma 504 Norman Continuum of Care records, the executive director currently has 9 licenses for the total of $1,953 or $217 per license. Recommendation is as follows. FSI should furnish HMIS licenses as it relates to intake personnel assigned to AFH at the expense of FSI. City attorney response is as follows. Agree with modification. If FSI is required to obtain separate licenses for the shelter, it is not inappropriate to include the cost for those licenses in the contract. If existing licenses can be utilized, additional costs for licenses should not be considered when developing the negotiated estimate for monthly costs to be included in a future contract amendment. City manager's response is as follows. Staff agrees with the city attorney's response.
Agree.
Comment 12? Comment 12, intake staff are treated as case managers, but do not meet the qualifications of case managers with at least an associate's degree in social work and/or experience in a similar field. Recommendation is as follows. FSI should employ qualified social work professionals to fulfill the role of case management. Qualified social work professionals should possess a degree from an accredited university or educational institution and/or have work experience in social work, psychology, psychiatry, counseling, or similar fields. The city attorney response is as follows. Agree with modification. If an intake worker is required to perform case management services, it is advisable to hire intake workers who also qualify for case management provisions. If council desires staff to require qualified case managers serve as intake workers, staff can include it in a future contract amendment. Additional costs for higher qualified employees should be considered. Care should be taken to ensure the city is not directing FSI's performance of the services in a manner that would harm FSI's status as an independent contractor of the city, as that status protects the city from liability related to the shelter's operations. City manager's response is as follows. Staff agrees with the city attorney's response. Staff will seek best practices regarding the qualifications of staff members in the various capacities required to support the function. Market forces will dictate costs to be recovered.
Works for me. It just, one of the things that has been a criticism is that there is no follow-up care, wraparound care, and this would take care of that.
Comment 13, ready? Okay. The incident report concerning the emergency call to Norman Fire Department on December 9, 2023 was not communicated to the city until December 12, 2023. The disclosure was initiated by an inquiry from ACA Puritan on December 11, 2023. Recommendation 13 is as follows. The contractor should immediately report all major incidents, events, emergencies, and/or injuries to the appropriate city officials, with special consideration given to events that are escalated to Norman Police Department and/or Norman Fire Department. City attorney's response is as follows. Agree with modification. FSI is required to provide incident reports on a monthly basis under the current contract. A shorter time frame, like 24 or 48 hours, could be implemented with a future contract amendment. It will be important to clearly define what constitutes a major incident, event, emergency, and/or injury. Management response is as follows. Staff is in support of clarifying reporting requirements needed to ensure transparency related to the safe operations of the facility. This information could be included in the monthly reporting requirements and enumerated in an amended service contract.
So, what constitutes a major incident? We're saying fire, assault,
Bodily injury,
overdoses.
overdoses, fatalities, God forbid.
And we just list those.
In the sense of the city should not have to go inquire about it, it should be reported.
Will this be like listed in the contract, Catherine? Like a definition of what constitutes major incident?
Yeah, we'll have to develop a definition for that so that it's clear what the expectations are.
And I would also mention, like, for the reporting requirements, like, I think that's gonna be a lot more like what you guys want to see for your reports, because keep in mind, when they call 911, they're technically telling the city too what's happening, because we also do the 911. So, and that's kind of how we found out about it anyway. So I think that for this stuff, it might be more important to think about maybe council, like what you guys want to see in your reports that you guys see on a monthly basis, or if you guys want reports as soon as something else happens like that. That way it's just easier for you guys to get that communication up the chain.
I kind of think the monthly report is fine unless it's like a death, you know, or like the whole structure burns down. In that case, I expect questions, but for something that's kind of like happened 1 week and is not something that the broad community knows about, but maybe a few in our community, you know, that could easily wait till the next oversight.
I'd like to see more frequent than that, just to keep us, the questions that come up or the allegations that come up through texts and all kinds of other things, what happened, all the rest of that. It just, I don't know, is that a burden on you to send one more text? You tell us about train wrecks, you
Oh,
tell
yeah,
us about.
no, yep, and happy to, it's just a matter of finding out where council's comfortable, to put that information in your hands as soon as, we're made aware of it, because, usually by first light, that's when you start getting phone calls too. We'd love to have the answer in your hands before you get the call.
I don't imagine we'll be getting calls on too many overdoses as
No.
much as like somebody did something.
Yeah. And that's, let's see what we come up with
Yeah,
major.
we'll work on some language.
as a thing. Councilmember Peacock?
Yeah, I think it was kind of wrapped up in those last comments. I think anything involving the police, I'd like to know pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Like 24 hours, I think, as you alluded to. I don't want to be caught flat-footed. You know, constituent calls wanting to know something, I want to have the information. Things involving EMS, I mean, that's not as time-sensitive, I don't feel like. And so if we want to draw a distinction between police and non-police calls, I think that's fair.
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, to be fair though, I don't know that we get all of the major incidents through the city. Like the city manager does a fairly good job, but like we don't know everything, and oftentimes things will come up and we'll hear things from constituents about police activity or what's going on here, and then we have to ask about that. And so I'm concerned about placing more of a burden on the shelter than we require for our police department across the whole city.
Yeah, and
So
typically,
like there has to be some kind of balance between, because we're not always up to speed on every single little thing that's happening in the city, and I don't expect that we should be. Like we should be able to say like, hey, Mr. City Manager, what's going on here? Like we do, we have access to that. And I think it's the same for the shelter. Like if we hear things, we can ask. So I think it's more of a report to the city, not necessarily so that like we can be immediately given information. Like I think that there's a level of like, as long as the city has it and we can request information, then that's one thing.
and as that relationship continues, just a more comfortable understanding of what types of instance we try to report out instantly, you know, to council, put it in your hands as quickly as possible. And there are instances around town where either you drove by and saw something first, or a constituent called and said, this is going on in my backyard, and you actually notified us that there was a thing we needed to be concerned about. So that does happen.
And I mean, I think that there's a level of like, what is our role as council as well? Like, we are a legislative body to make policy, and that doesn't always, like, we're not, what am I gonna do? Like, there's an incident at the shelter, I'm not gonna go down there, right? Like, we have protocols, we have staff, we have employees and procedures that are in place to take care of those things. Like, really, it's just an information to us, so like, so I'm less concerned about it. Like, I need to know immediately what's happening there, because I think that that's like undue oversight over something, right? Like, I'm not going to know if an incident happens in, you know, line maintenance or at Westwood or whatever immediately, and I wouldn't expect that I should, just based on the role that
We'll find
I'm
that balance
occupying.
just to make we just, want council to always be comfortable with the information that's made readily available to you.
And the contract language will be to report to whoever is the designated manager of the contract essentially at the city. And then we can look at it and decide whether it should be disseminated to council, if it's gonna be something you guys have questions about or you hear about, like we do with everything else.
Definitely if it burns down.
Yes.
Or blows up.
That one's pretty easy.
You will know.
Before we get there,
What the role is and the expectation of what information we should have and when we have it.
comment 14. Beds are reserved for repeat clients while new and potential clients are added to a wait list, which was prompted by a call from the city manager about loitering outside of the shelter prior to 4:30 p.m. The executive director of FSI also indicated better outcomes for clients are the result of the existence of reserved beds. This may indicate that data concerning the homeless population is negatively impacted due to the lack of opportunity of being input into the HMIS system. According to correspondence with the executive director, clients are not checked out of the HMIS system unless they do not show up by 6 p.m. in the evening to claim their reserved bed. Best practice indicates clients should be checked out of the HMIS system upon departure from the shelter at 7:30 a.m. when the shelter closes for the day. Reserving beds prevents this procedure from occurring. According to the interview conducted on March 8, 2024, if beds are available at 6 p.m., a newcomer will receive a bed on a first-come, first-served basis with prioritization placed on homeless individuals with disabilities. Recommendation 14 is as follows. FSI should not reserve beds at the AFH facility. AFH should operate on a first-come, first-served basis with prioritization placed on homeless individuals with disabilities. A method to decrease loitering should be designed and implemented. City Attorney's response is as follows. Agree. This issue is not currently addressed in the contract with FSI, but could be included in a future contract amendment. Care should be taken to ensure the city is not directing FSI's performance of the services in a manner that would harm FSI's status as an independent contractor of the city, as that status protects the city from liability related to the shelter's operations. Management's response to comment 14 is as follows. Staff concurs with the city attorney's response. Staff supports clarifying best practices as a measurable benchmark to be reported against on a monthly basis.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm struggling with this one. I guess like what is related to best practices and just thinking about the when a guest comes and knows that they have a bed for the next night, right? It allows, I would say, like less anxiety around knowing where they're going to sleep that night. Also, like services that can potentially be provided, and whenever that, I know that there are many clients that are staying there, guests that are staying there that do work, and so being able to have a place, but if you're working and then you can't get there by the time that they start intaking, then what happens. I understand the need for like a first come first serve, and also like the protocols with HMIS and making sure that like we are intaking and getting that correct data. But I'm struggling with like what is the right balance to protect the individuals that are staying there, and what's going to be like the longevity of like helping them get housed or being able to get services. So I'm like, what is the right balance? Yeah.
So, there are shelters who operate in a way where if you have employment, you can let them know, my shift ends at this time, can you reserve my bed? And that's fine. But then what about the client who doesn't have somewhere to go and they show up at 4:15 and then they're competing for a reserved bed for somebody who decides to show up at 5:50 because they know they have a reserved bed and they're waitlisted and then turned away. And their data is not collected on the person who's turned away. And if it is, it's destroyed according to April.
I understand the document keeping, piece of it, but I also understand like the human
Element.
element to it and what that means. And so, yeah, I think there might be a balance to strike with
I agree.
kind of, and I think there might be a negotiation around like what is best practice, how can we ensure that we're not doing undue harm to the guests, but also I think one of the reasons why was that loitering piece, right? Like the way that we would see people lining up at certain hours, and I know some of that has been addressed, and we talked about security on the backside and where they're entering the facility and various things. So I think some of that could also be mitigated through the process. But yeah, I'd like to hear more about how we can strike a balance.
Councilmember Gray.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. And I would say the implementation of a reserve bed system was in response to trying to cut down loitering. But yeah, a balance is needed. And then I would just ask city manager, anytime we do get complaints of loitering, it's been a quick call and you see like trash or loitering addressed fairly quickly.
Yeah, it's been less visible on Gray Street, and I mean the space to the north of the facility is I think it's probably less impactful to the community when they're just gathering and gearing up for the doors to open. And there's a couple of picnic tables up there on the north, and of course on the east side of the building where it's a little shadier. It just makes sure there's not big groups of people standing on the sidewalk that may prevent other folks from passing. But honestly, we changed some fencing out, and it has been cleaner, and the crowds have been less visible on the Gray Street frontage prior to check-in. So it's been better in the last handful of months.
And I would say since we have been putting off a renovation for cost benefits, but just gonna note that, a sprinkler system, readjusting the innards of that building and even where people enter from, because I think it was suggested it would be on the east side of the building. Just see a benefit in making some changes that makes everybody's lives a little more smooth. So,
Yeah, minimizing the impact on everybody.
yes, even if you're only gonna maybe recoup half the cost. Okay, that's all I had to add. Thank you.
Councilmember Peacock.
Do we have any data that talks about like how many consecutive nights these beds are being reserved for? Is it like a 3-day period, or is it a
No,
month?
it's consistent from correspondence with April, is that if her process is she will ask you if you're coming back in the evening. If you say yes, your bed is reserved. If not, then your bed is not reserved, and it's a free space, I assume, for a person who's never been there or a person who's been waitlisted. But from my understanding, it's turned into a permanent shelter without permanent shelter infrastructure.
That's kind of why I was asking. I completely agree with Councilmember Schuler. There's got to be a balance here. The human element is, you want to make space for everybody, which is impossible. And so, I don't know, Anthony, Catherine, do we run afoul of this independent contractor status if we say no more than 7 nights consecutively, or no more than 14 nights consecutively, reserved beds? I just want to,
Yeah, I think we can look at it as we draft changes. We'll look at it as on the whole and do some research. Like I said, these inquiries are very fact specific.
okay, yeah.
And so there's probably not just an example.
No, and I don't know what the,
line, you know what I
right,
mean?
exactly.
So we'll look at that, and it may just be asking Ms. Dozier to draft policies and then attaching those to an agreement so that
Right.
we make sure it's something that they're in control of.
Because you would hope that after, 2 weeks consecutively staying at the shelter, that person is maybe on their way to a housing plan and might not need to be reserving beds anymore. And so if we were able to put some kind of time frame on that, or if, April was able to do that, just trying to keep as many beds open for as many people as possible.
Councilmember Holman.
Yeah. Is a difficult one because we did ask for that to be implemented in response to an issue, and that solution has reduced that problem significantly. And I would be worried that if we didn't, that people would start lining up again as early as they're going to race. Somebody will wait there all day long. And if we say, well, you can't wait here, then they're going to wait as close as they would be allowed to, if it's across the street, if it's wherever they can be the first one to sprint to get in the front of the line, if that's how it is. And then I can envision people getting competitive with each other over it. And so I definitely would want to have a way that we would be able to address that. And I would be concerned too about people that are working and may not get off till late or whatever it may be. Or and we know that, the wait list for housing voucher is 6+ months, closer to a year maybe. And then finding a place once you have a voucher can take up to a year for some people. So that's a challenging one as well. So
Perhaps
we
that
could
could
figure
be
out a
an
way we do it.
incentive to say, those who are engaging in the housing process, you can reserve that bed for the next night because you're on track. And if you're not engaging, then you're going to be the last one in line.
Yes,
So
if you're not
could you
able-
use it as an incentive to
Carrot
help
instead
them
of a stick.
engage?
Then this may not be the permanent shelter for you if the purpose of this shelter is to give people an emergency place to stay and give you a place to stay while we're trying to get you into something safer and permanent or more permanent. But yeah, if there's individuals that can't or won't, then they may need something more comprehensive than this shelter, if that's the case. And so that could be a way for sure, as long as they're engaging in the getting that, then maybe that's a way. Yeah.
Are you saying that's a definition problem between a permanent shelter and a temporary shelter? And we're blurring the lines between them, am I understanding it?
Yeah, that maybe, if somebody doesn't want help with permanent housing and they're just staying there every night because they can, then that's something to think about, that if that's the case, then maybe that's not the shelter that is for them.
Square peg, round hole in that scenario.
Agreeing with the manager and the idea that that's an incentive for a behavior that we want, which is to become housed and self-sufficient. Sometimes takes an amount of time.
Yeah.
Just thought. Councilmember Schuler?
Yeah, my comments were going to be similar to Councilmember Holman. Just thinking about, how long it does take for people to get on the list for vouchers and how long it takes to find a place. And, we did hear that we're doing better with the amount of Section 8 that people have access to, but, it's not nearly what we need. And so, I would be concerned with, placing a limit on, the number of nights that someone might be able to stay there, but also, the conversation that ensued about, potentially thinking about incentivizing and people are working through a plan or might be a good balance to strike between that. Yeah, that I guess we were talking about. Because, I'm just really concerned that we've got so many other gaps that we need to fill that is not the shelter's responsibility, again, like we were talking about, but our lack of housing inventory for Section 8, also affordable housing, low income, all of that, is really trying with the solutions that we're really trying to address homelessness as a whole construct.
And that thought of, if you, under that line of thought, if you are engaged in a housing track, now you don't have to spend your day waiting in line. You can spend your day working with other service providers, closing other gaps, identification, resume work, medical needs, whatever it is. Because the alternative is they are spending all day waiting for the bed, and that does not help them achieve their goal either. So.
Comment 15?
15, please.
This is where we get into the financials. Please stop me if you don't understand anything. I'm happy to explain or show you analysis from Excel. FSI's initial budget proposed monthly personnel cost of $19,658.40, or $314,534.40 for the period of November 2022 through February 2024. An analysis of FSI's payroll expense reports were conducted and indicated total payroll cost of $355,315.76 in the aggregate, and total overtime costs of $51,089.81 in the aggregate from November 2022 until February 2024. An analysis of FSI's payroll expense reports indicated $406,405.57 in total payroll expenses, including overtime, from November 2022 to February 2024. Total actual personnel expenses indicated costs were over budget by $90,871.17. FSI's initial budget proposed monthly subcontractor cost of $32,400, or $356,400 for the period of November 2022 through September 2023. That's when the contract was terminated. An analysis of FSI's QuickBook transactions reports and bank records indicated that FSI paid a total of $345,640 to Blackjack Investigations, which is the security subcontractor, from October 26, 2022 to September 15, 2023 for services rendered for the period of November 2022 through September 15, 2023. Total actual subcontractor expense indicates costs were under budget by $10,760. FSI's initial budget proposed monthly operational costs of $2,744, or $43,904 for the period of November 2022 through February 2024. An analysis of FSI's QuickBook transaction reports and bank records related to AFH for the period of October 2022 through February 2024 indicated a total of $92,285.12 in operational expenditures. Total actual operational expenditures indicated costs were over budget by $48,384.12. FSI's initial budget proposed startup costs of $31,136. An analysis of FSI's QuickBooks transaction reports and bank records related to AFH for the period of October 2022 through February 2024 indicated a total of $33,746.11 in total startup costs. Total actual startup expenses indicates costs were over budget by $2,610.11. Munis, the city's ERP system or accounting system, indicated that City of Norman remitted $908,454.40 in payments to FSI for startup costs, payroll expenses, subcontractor costs, and monthly operational expenses for a friend's house from October 2022 until February 2024. An analysis of AFH financial records identified total actual expenditures amounted to $878,076.80, indicating a surplus of $30,377.60 during the aforementioned period. On the following page, there is a brief summary analysis. So on the first line, you have con payments or City of Norman payments to FSI, $908,454.40. A friend's house regular wages, $355,315.76, which is a less, so you subtract that from the $908,000. Following is the overtime wages, $51,089.81. Check payments to BJS or BJI, which is a subcontractor, is $345,640. Operational expenses, $92,285.12. Startup expenses, American bedding for bunk beds, $31,350. And then the additional startup expenses used by, expended on the credit card ending 9/8/85, $2,396.11. Total operational expenses, $878,076.80. And then surplus or con payments in excess of AFH total wages, contract expenses, operational expenses, and startup expenses, $30,377.60. Additionally, funds allocated to expenditures such as regular wages paid, in addition to salary to Executive Director of FSI, $6,646.74, unearned overtime, $881.48, and unreconciled operational expenses, $2,377.38, indicated mismanaged funds in the amount of $9,835.60 during the period of November 2022 through February 2024. Comments 17 through 19 will show the detail of those expenditures. The remaining funds in the amount of $20,542 is currently unaccounted for. This analysis does not account for any electronic funds transfers, payments to FSI from March 2024 through May 2024, nor does it include expenditures related to AFH for the period of March 2024 through May 2024. There's also a exhibit that is showing the reconciliation of remaining con funds, which is the $30,000, the surplus, and I did the Friends House wages misclassified as overtime or unearned overtime, operational expenses, and regular wages. Recommendation is as follows. Management should determine a method to recoup the mismanaged funds in the amount of $9,835.60. Additionally, AFH's accounting should be conducted by a third-party company or experienced accountant to ensure proper recording of expenditures. City Attorney's response is as follows. Disagree. There is not a breach of K-2223-56 that would support recouping funding provided to FSI. Section 6 of K-2223-56 required an initial payment of FSI of $85,968.40 within 10 days of the effective date of the agreement and 4 payments thereafter of $54,832.40 per month from December 2022 through March 2023. The total for the initial term of the contract was $305,298. The contract was amended twice to reflect term extensions beyond March 2023, but maintained the monthly fee of $54,832.40. During the period of April 2023 through February 2024, the total amount for 11 months was $603,156.40. Added to the compensation set forth in the initial contract, the total amount due to the FSI per terms of the contract was $908,454.40. If council desires to change the contract fee from a negotiated fee for services to an exact reimbursement for expenses, staff can attempt to negotiate contract language with FSI to address this change. Management's response is as follows. Staff will ensure council recognizes any deviation from contractual agreements seeking direction for any corrective action. In a modified service contract, the basis for cost recovery will be more clearly delineated to make compliance monitoring more user-friendly. I'd like to preface this by my recommendation included recoupment because my initial conversations with city manager presented the idea of recoupment.
Fine with the recommendation. Well, agree with the response from the city attorney, but agree with the recommendation of, it's worth having a negotiate or talk about to see if being reimbursed or the way we've been doing it. I don't dislike the idea of an exact reimbursement for expenses, but if that helps account or track it better.
Because we do pay pretty darn timely, so.
Councilmember Nash?
Yeah, some I've been left in the desk a while back, but I can't get past this 131,000 that they're over budget.
In certain areas.
Well, right. In total, in a handful of areas. In the contract, since we're not doing a specific reimbursement, City Manager, you said we approved these increases to the contract.
I think any modifications we've made to the contract, Catherine will have the
Yeah.
list when those changes occurred.
And they've maintained that monthly payment. So the monthly payment has not increased.
So we didn't set the contract up as a reimbursement. It was, here's what we think it's gonna cost to operate. That's what we paid against. And
Okay.
then cost incurred were different than what those estimates were.
Okay.
In the different line items that they've said. So their estimates on what those items would cost were different from what they actually cost, but they are still under budget based on what we have given them in total on the
Okay.
things. And there are 30, based on what I'm understanding, 30,000, sorry if I'm overstepping, but just trying to clarify.
30 under?
30 that we don't, that they're under. So they've,
It's a
so I mean, this looks bad because you're like over budget, but like it's not, I think, an understanding of what
Kind of,
each of those things would have costed, and I'd rather see us negotiate changes to the pay structures for each of those line items rather than a direct, I guess, reimbursement for each thing. Like, I think we just need to align the costs with what they actually cost. And, I think there's still a question of like the 20,000. What's missing, I'd like to know where
yeah.
that is.
Ultimately, there's gonna be I would expect that there'd be some kind of renegotiation of the, this amount going forward after we bring forward all these adjustments to the contract. So I don't like the idea that there's some that's kind of unaccounted for or mismanaged. But I kind of see this contract as being old news, subject to change going forward as we bring up these new recommendations and these requests in an updated contract.
And we started out with what was a temporary 4-month agreement into a multi-year, long-term agreement. So definitely apples to oranges when you look at it over time.
And type of shelter, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, basically finishing off, I guess, my comments. Sorry, I was trying to just make sure that like we were understanding what was actually happening here, because you hear over budget. Well, one of them is under budget, and then really looking at the line items, I think, is the kind of important takeaway, because I don't want people to extrapolate from this that we changed the contract to give them more money based on these overages. We did not do that. They were still getting the same amount, which I think is important to say, that we negotiated what the contract amount was going to be, and then they were paid that. So I think the conversation is like, how is the accounting then being reported back to us on those things, and if we have the flexibility. And I think every grant or contract that you're ever awarded, they're allowed flexibility in where things get paid to, because I think about our contracts with all of our different contractors for building projects or whatever. We often see how many contract changes, right, per project. That's a really consistent thing that we see. So like I don't want to throw a friend's house kind of under the bus that's not any different. Often our construction costs are very different from what they're projected to be, and we have to update and change those things. So I think this is in line with some of that. And so just kind of putting that into a greater perspective of like, we do contracts all of the time as a city. And it is not rare for things to go over budget.
Agreed.
Or to, even things where we'll take money that we saved in one project and move it to another project that was over budget. We do that within our own accounting processes through our different, finances. So, but there is a concern about the 20,000 that we can't find. I am concerned about that. And so I don't know, like, I'm okay with trying to figure out recoupment if appropriate, based on like, can we figure out where those funds are going? I know that you've dug into that extensively. So is that at this point lost to the wind, or like, or can we figure it out?
I'd like to preface this by saying the majority of funds transmitted or sent to FSI for the operations of AFH went to the operations of AFH. And like you said, contracts contain contingencies all the time. A part of the, I mean, if you were to look at these, the whole number of $90,800 is a 10% contingency, right? And then you have the 30,000 that's left over. That now, okay, now you have 20,000 that's unaccounted for. Unaccounted for means that it could not be reconciled between the QuickBooks, the bank records, payroll records, or regular, wages that were paid out in addition to salary. So that again, if April or her accounting team or her finance team at FSI can locate the 20,000, we can figure out where it went and what it's applied to. But as of now, the records don't give us that information, and I can't assume where it is.
Sure. Yeah, so again, I guess I'll reiterate, based on that, then I think that it's fair. I mean, really, you're saying just under 10,000 is what you're recommending to be recouped. But I also think that we should negotiate those different line items, make sure that we're paying for the right things where they're supposed to be, and to like have a negotiation over what the actual cost looks like. Because I think that's probably an easier way to
Now
do
we
things
know.
than to reimburse
Yes.
directly for every receipt that's cost. So, yeah. I said a lot. Sorry.
Any questions or comments on that, or are we ready to move to 16?
Let's move to 16.
Okay. Comment 16, all payments from City of Norman and all related expenses are commingled in one FSI bank account regardless of program. Recommendation is as follows. All FSI programs that are funded by the City of Norman or benefit from funds administered by the City of Norman should have separate bank accounts to properly account for sources of funding and expenditures as it relates to city programs. City Attorney's response is as follows. Agree. Contract K-2223-56 did not require separate bank accounts for funding and expenses related to the operation of the shelter. This can and should be included in a future contract amendment. City Manager's response is as follows. Staff agrees with the City Attorney's response.
That's an easy one.
The next section is unearned overtime wages or overtime wages. AFH's payroll records indicated earned overtime was paid in the amount of $50,208.33. AFH's payroll records also indicated a total of 1,307.22 hours charged to overtime and total overtime cost of $51,089.81, which included 5 instances of unearned overtime wages that were paid in the amount of $881.48. An analysis of the remaining 19 dates when overtime was accrued and paid were compared to FSI recognized holidays, indicating the wages classified as overtime may be attributed to holiday pay. A review of FSI's payroll records indicate wages were classified as regular, holiday, sick, and overtime for FSI employees of other locations, meaning employees outside of AFH. In a letter from Paychex, FSI's payroll service provider addressed to FSI dated April 19, 2024, Paychex stated, "Please accept my apology on behalf of Paychex for showing inaccurate holiday overtime entries on employee pay stubs for 2023. We have since added the entry information to show holiday and overtime as a combined entry. Food and Shelter was not responsible for this matter, and I'm truly sorry for any inconvenience to you and your employees." Recommendation is as follows. For every nightly position, there should be a part-time position to provide relief for full-time positions and reduce the necessity of overtime, which ultimately increases payroll costs. This estimates about 5 additional part-time staff to adequately staff AFH. FSI's payroll records indicates 2 additional personnel were hired in September 2023. City Attorney's response: agree with modification. Care should be taken to ensure the city is not directing FSI's performance of the services in a manner that would harm FSI's status as an independent contractor of the city, as that status protects the city from liability related to the shelter's operations. Management response is as follows. Staff supports required board action to approve salary and wage rates at the shelter if they are to be recovered through the service contract. This can be clearly delineated in an amended contract. Okay. We're gonna move to comment 18, April Dozier's regular wages in addition to salary. FSI's board meeting minutes related to November 21, 2022 indicates approval of a 9% salary increase for all salaried staff. Additionally, the FSI board approved bonuses of $2,750 and $1,100 for the executive director of FSI and FSI staff members respectively. FSI's board minute meetings did not indicate authorization of additional payments to Ms. Dozier related to the role of AFH shelter operator. According to correspondence with the executive director of FSI, the salary for executive director of FSI was not expended from the budget allocated and paid for the operations of AFH. Regular wages paid to the executive director of FSI, in addition to salary, were paid out of the budget allocated for the operations of AFH. Although FSI's board minutes recorded the approval of wage increases and bonuses, FSI's payroll records did not indicate payment of a bonus in the amount of $2,750. FSI's payroll records related to the executive director's wages indicated a 2022 base salary of $95,370.08 and a 2023 base salary of $101,152.25 for a total base salary increase of $5,782.17, which is approximately a 6% increase. In 2022, regular wages were paid to the executive director in addition to executive director 2022 base salary in the amount of $2,940.24, approximately 3% of 2022 base salary. In 2023, regular wages were paid to the executive director in addition to the executive director's 2023 base salary in the amount of $3,706.50. The executive director was paid regular wages in the amount of $6,646.74 in addition to salary for 11 pay periods from November 2022 through September 2023. The executive director's payroll records indicated a total increase, which is base salary increase and regular wages in addition to the executive director's base salary in the amount of $12,428.91. Recommendation is as follows. Following that paragraph is a breakdown of salary analysis for April Dozier, the executive director. Recommendation is as follows. AFH's payroll should be conducted by a third-party company or experienced accountant to ensure proper recording of timekeeping and payroll expenses. The contractor, FSI, should provide all related, detailed, and completed documentation included but not limited to payroll and contractor records related to AFH on a monthly basis. City Attorney's response is as follows. Agree with modification. Board meeting records should be examined to determine whether the board of FSI authorized additional payments to Ms. Dozier as she took on the role of shelter operator. If council would like to require FSI to hire a third-party company or accountant for its bookkeeping, staff can attempt to include it in a future contract amendment. City manager's response is as follows. Staff agrees with the city attorney's response. Any questions or comments?
Should that be a thing that we direct them to do? It just,
I totally agree with this. That
Yeah.
we should attempt to see if we can incorporate that into a future contract. They have a third-party bookkeeper, just to kind of keep things clean.
other thoughts on that? Agreement, disagreement?
I guess, do we require that of any other contractor that we have with the city. So would that be,
I mean, that is
An
really getting
unfair-
into their operations, because it's not just related to this operation, it's their entire nonprofit. So that concerns me. There are a lot of nonprofits that don't have someone outside looking at their books, regularly. I think that's an expense that a lot of them can't take on. I've been on the board of nonprofits that have an administrative person trying to take that on, and eventually they grew to a point where they had to hire someone. And I don't know enough about food and shelter to know where they are in terms of that kind of decision.
It's a
But
pretty high base salary for a nonprofit that couldn't afford to hire an accountant.
yeah, and I don't know enough about their finances.
nonprofit doesn't mean that you don't get paid well. I'm just,
I'm seeing that more and more.
well, and also, I just, I guess the piece of why this is coming up is because there were some salary that was paid out of a friend's house's budget for this. Because a lot of this doesn't really relate
So
outside.
salary,
I'm trying to understand like why this piece is in here, right? We're like scrutinizing the executive director's salary based on, and then the board. So I'm wondering if like there's a way that you can say what percentage of the executive director's salary comes out of a friend's house based on being the shelter operator, right? So like I think that makes sense, and negotiating that piece and making sure that it's in the line item for salary or payroll within kind of those pay bands that we're talking about whenever we're so yeah, I'm trying to understand like what happened.
so as an exempt employee, you do not get overtime. Your salary is your base, right? A lot of us put in 50, 60 hours a week. There's no overtime. We get our salary, it's the same every 2 weeks. It's Oklahoma state law with state Department of Labor, right? What happened is, according to April, her salary did not come from the budget allocated for AFH. But what she did charge was overtime hours. That did come from the budget to give herself regular wages
Okay,
from the budget
got it.
in the amount of $6,646.
And that's for operating the shelter.
According to her, it was for cleaning in the start-up months of the shelter, but it extended until September 2023. I can actually show you data so that you can visualize it.
Well, sitting like you, it's not our job. I don't think that's correct to do, but that, I don't know her contract, and I don't know any
Right.
of the other parts. I only know the experience that I've had as a salaried employee, as an hourly employee. And an hourly employee is the only person that can earn overtime under
Sure, yeah.
state law.
No, I understand that distinction. I'm just trying to understand because like there are two entities here,
Yeah.
right? Like there's the operation of a friend's house and then food and shelter. And so I think there just needs to be clarification on how the executive director is being paid, but not, it's food and shelter's board's obligation to, do
Compensate.
the wages and how they're managing all of that, but just making sure that, we're not running afoul of the money that we're getting, but clearly identifying if any money from a friend's house is going to the executive director, because that is, in essence, managing personnel within that contract that's a supervising role, right?
She's-
Adding more staff, adding more people, so like there is a cost to that. So,
And she deserves
and I
recognition.
do understand what you're saying as well. Yeah.
So here we have her salary in this row, in the pay period, or check date. Here is where she would mark down extra hours. And not saying that those hours weren't performed, that work wasn't performed, but just to highlight those funds came from the budget
Yeah.
of the 54,000.
So would you say moving forward when we do the negotiations to clearly identify if there is money going to the executive director, that is indicated in the contract and in our budget, which I think will rectify
Yes.
this situation? Yeah.
Just make it more clear.
Comment 19, last comment. FSI's bank account records were used to reconcile expenditures related to AFH recorded in FSI's QuickBooks transaction report for the period of October 2022 through February 2024. The reconciliation identified 9 unreconciled operational expenses in the amount of $2,307.38. Recommendation is as follows. AFH's accounting should be conducted by a third-party company or experienced accountant to ensure proper recording of expenditures. The contractor, FSI, should provide all related detail and complete documentation, including but not limited to expense records related to AFH, to the city on a monthly basis. City attorney's response is as follows. Agree. If council would like to require FSI to hire a third-party company or accountant for its bookkeeping, staff can attempt to include it in a future contract amendment. It is not uncommon for smaller nonprofits to handle bookkeeping in-house, but allowing a third-party or accountant to handle these issues is a good practice. Management's response is as follows. Staff recognizes this recommendation as a risk reduction function. Staff will ensure council is in full understanding of this scenario so they may consider the cost benefit of making such requirements a component of an amended service contract.
So, just thinking about the oversight piece, because I think that's really what you're trying to get at, right? We've talked a lot about reporting and accounting and a lot of those things that I think will help address, I guess, the gray areas of where we are. I know I serve on a nonprofit board, and we have audits that are conducted on our financials, which I think is a good practice. And we also have a CPA on our board that also helps kind of function. So I don't think that it's a bad idea for that conversation to come up with the board of food and shelter. But I'm still hesitant to say that like it's a requirement of the contract, because we're not requiring any other providers to do the same thing. And I think that that's, basically saying like, we're going to make you do this, but not somebody else. And I also think that we now have an internal city auditor, which will, if we're getting the proper reporting, you'll be able to reconcile all of that stuff as well. So you are also a fail-safe in this process now that we didn't have before. And so moving forward, we have oversight on our side as well. So I guess my recommendation would just be to recommend that the Board of Food and Shelter think about this, and then we also have you as our backstop.
These are all recommendations.
Yeah.
They are not requirements. You can
I would
agree,
with you.
disagree.
And particularly if they decide to move to a separate bank account, it makes that so easy.
Yes.
But we don't require road paving companies or
Right.
anybody else to ever do anything like that. I think the difference is a matter of us being able to reply to the taxpayer that this is where we spent the money and we did well in trying to make sure that you got your dollars worth. And if they don't, then we can hear public comment on it, and they can tell us to change the contract. And of course, it's also for food and shelter or for a friend's house to be able to negotiate that contract. If there's something it's onerous in there, let's talk about it, because I don't see it, but, okay. Somebody, okay.
I keep blocking him.
It's all right, because I'm going to dovetail into your comments. That's what it works
Okay.
out. No, I think that, what Councilmember Schuler said was pretty spot on, and then, that the board of directors of any nonprofit has the fiduciary duty to, maintain the finances and good standing and all that. And so when we talk about $20,000 missing, it's the board of directors that is ultimately responsible. If that money has to be recouped, it's the board of directors that has to, figure out the way. And so as long as we spell out, I just would be happy to reaffirm that fiduciary responsibility. Not saying we're not going to require you to have a third party accountant, just acknowledge that the duty is on you, and any failings of that duty is on you.
Yes. And just to, a lot of the recommendations as far as the accounting and third party, is because we are the sole funding source for the shelter. So even though we try to shield ourselves from that liability, that is still a fact, that it can trace back to us as the sole investor or funder of the program, and we will still be left liable compared to other contracts in the city who have other business that's coming from different avenues.
See that.
Yes, ma'am.
So does that mean if just thinking of a 24/7, how it's supposed to work, so in the future, if it wasn't just us funding like a shelter, that would reduce our liability?
Yes, and also that it operates in a building that is owned by the city of Norman. So these two factors.
Yeah. Double it up.
Complicates things.
Any more questions for Shakira? You can read the conclusion.
Okay.
Now you know how I feel.
We can read
No, we can read it.
it. We can read it.
You know how I feel when they give me 5 proclamations. Yes, sir.
Yes, a lot of water.
Mayor, I was going to suggest, and after discussing with Brenda, if the third item, if we wanted to take that up next Tuesday before council.
Yes, I was asking them
Two
to.
thumbs up.
It's
Three
not,
thumbs
it's
up.
not my
I mean,
control, but
Consensus
definitely want to
achieved.
get you guys home to your families.
No, go home to a supper plate. That would be-
Let's get dinner tonight.
Cookies on the gate so far.
So we,
The agenda, I didn't.
are we all
Right.
agreed
No,
that we
seriously.
leave agenda item 3 and postpone it until next Tuesday?
Yes.
Anybody in disagreement?
We can't take that.
We're gonna do that. Guess what your favorite word is? We are adjourned.
Thank you, council, thank you, mayor.
Excellent job, excellent.